Yeah, I will.
Right.
I will. No. Okay.
Terrific.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode 32 of the Drew Pavlis Show. This is going out live every day. It's a radio show. Today we've got Barclay McGain. He's a very infamous figure on Australian university campuses. He's seen as like the bane of all evil, I guess, for a lot of these people. Realistically, I think you're just sort of like I know people call Barclay far right. I think he's like pretty centre right, to be honest. Because but I mean, we'll get into it, Barclay. We'll have discussion and we'll have a lot of debate and everything. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself to the audience and explain a bit why you're so controversial and tell us what you've been up to lately since over the last year or two?
Of course. Good evening, everyone. I have to say, Drew, you being on the RVU Many show actually took me back to the 2022 Victorian state election. We're at the Mulgrave pre-poll which is, of course, the former Victorian Premier Andrews' seat. I was campaigning for the great Michael Piastrino, a solid Liberal. And you were there, of course. Avi Yemeni was there. And we had a Kim Jong-un impersonator.
I actually never met him then. But the whole Kim Jong-un thing.
It was the most interesting pre-poll I've ever been to. But no, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you to all the viewers and listeners. My name is Barclay. I graduated university in 2023.
You've actually graduated before me.
Oh,
yeah.
From UQ. Yeah. It took me, what did it take me? 4.5 years in the end for a degree that was supposed to take 3 years. That's all right. But I've got my economics degree. Yeah. And I was involved in the Young LNP from the age of 16. Unfortunately, I was suspended in 2019 for a schoolies video, which is now very infamous, whereby we ran around on the Gold Coast asking people a number of questions about what their opinions were on Scott Morrison, what their opinions were on freedom of speech, our Australian national flag and national anthem. And one of the respondents said, we've got to stop celebrating a culture that couldn't invent the bloody wheel. And I happen to believe that was at the peak of cancel culture, the peak of where we were policing people left, right, and center. You got to think that this was only 6 months away from when we were yelling at people and taking videos of them in public for not wearing a mask and doxing our neighbors for going for a walk around the park. So this was in the lead up to that. And as a result, I was a victim of the culture at the time. Not that I refer to myself as a victim in many ways, but it was just more of a victim of circumstance, I suppose you could say. But in many ways, the media ran with the story.
Let's discuss it. Let's discuss it, right? So I knew you before it all happened. And I was on the student union council, and back then I was way more lefty, but I still refused to sign on to the social alternative motion to fully condemn you. And for that, I received the greatest opprobrium, and I was almost cast out, right? But let's talk about the Surfers Paradise one, because obviously that's a very infamous moment in your history, right? And listen, here's the thing I always wanted to ask. In the editing process, no one thought, let's clip out that part. No one thought about that at any point. I mean, like, how did it get to the point where it went out?
Not at all. It never came to mind. And what I will say is that if you actually watch the video in its entirety, it's about a 7-minute video. There are many instances where I talk about the idea of merit, not the idea that you should be judging people by their skin color, their race, their creed, that everything is based on merit. And if people see my track record through a long period of time, they will see that I've long been a supporter of merit. And in my opinion, that's why the Liberal Party appealed to me when I was just 16 and when I joined. And multiple other parts of the video. This was not supposed to be a sanctioned promotional video, Drew. This was supposed to be an organic snapshot of what school leavers thought at the time. One of the things that I'm, categorically against is censorship. And when people go out there and say a view, I believe that we should be allowing it to be aired. There were people on that same clip saying Scott Morrison's an F-wit. And now, you think, okay, well, Barclay's a liberal, liberal guy. Why did he not clip that out? Well, because it was their organic views. When we ask people their views, we ought air it. And that was something that I thought was something, I'm not professed to be in the media industry, but that was something that I thought was write down my own viewpoints, my own view on life, that we shouldn't really censor things. So look, that was kind of the ins and outs of it. There was that was never brought up in the editing process. I understood that attaching it to a party meant I had to follow a chain of command, and that's exactly what I did. I had the video approved by the young LNP president at the time, Nelson Savan, and that was all given to go. Yes. Yeah, so I followed all of the correct protocols, but as a result, of course, the media came for me. I do think that the media backlash did happen to do a lot with a caricature that the media created of myself, which was that I was some private school elitist kid from the Gold Coast who joined the Young Liberals at such a young age and was a symbol of white privilege and entitlement. So,
let me say about that. So you did go to a good school though, right?
Yeah, Emmanuel College on the Gold Coast. Yeah.
Hang on 1 second. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is the audience getting feedback from my mic? I'm trying to work this out.
That's all right. That's all good. No, I went to a good school. No better than Villanova, I don't think, Drew.
yeah. No, look, I've made no bones about it. I mean, I did go to a good school.
No, look, I think they just created this caricature. And, Louise Milligan, who's supposed to be one of the premier journalists in the country, publicly funded, might I add, her sole commentary on the saga was Barclay McGain surely sounds like a character out of a Charles Dickens novel. So it's not exactly that they're delving into the facts, the for and against. It was just an all-out character assassination, and it's remarkable. And Stephen Shibura makes a very good point. It's remarkable that it's still being brought up, but of course, people ask about it, and it's what got a lot of media attention, and it still gets media attention today.
You did get for a brief day. You were the #1 figure of hate in Australia. But by the way, Barclay, I think we've got a comment here. Someone says Barclay has you on speaker. Do you have headphones by any chance or anything like that?
Yeah, I might be able to grab some headphones. Hang on just a moment. If you want to delay and maybe
Yeah, let's take a brief moment. No worries. Just so we can make sure we've got some good stuff. Thank you, guys. No, it's very funny. I want to apologize to everybody for the stream starting late. It started about 20 minutes late. I was due to go on Avi Yamini's show for about 10 minutes on at about 7:20 p.m. And he had Joanna Howe on, I think, Dr. Joanna Howe, and it went on a bit over. So that's why it started a bit late. I'm sorry. Are you a progressive patriot, Drew? I like the term. It's a good term. Can you observe Anglo norms about punctuality, low social cohesion moment? Well said. That's actually well said. It's the lazy Southern Mediterraneans have started to stream late. I'm very sorry to everybody. There go the Southern Mediterraneans once again. But it's very funny. I mean, listen, I remember when this all happened to Barclay, and it was certainly a very big moment of there was a lot of hatred directed towards him, and I did feel bad for Barclay in the sense that I think this happened very shortly after what happened to Wilson, and I felt really that made me very reluctant then to want to cancel Barclay. Even at the time, I was way more lefty, but even at the time, I didn't want to immediately cancel Barclay because having memory of what happened with Wilson was so devastating. And, there was a massive hate campaign against Barclay for 24 hours on, and it still goes to this day.
True. I don't know we're going to improve it that much. I've got my headphones here, but they're out of charge, so that's no good.
Okay. All good.
No, the feedback is not too bad that people can still hear and we can have a coherent conversation. But no, look, thank you so much.
It's okay now.
Reflections as well. Yeah. Brilliant.
I think it's better now. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's
awesome. Plenty of comments coming in. Thank you so much, guys. We'll endeavor to answer a lot of those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the thing. I want to ask you a bit about your backstory and your life and everything, because we haven't even caught up for ages, Barclay. But no. But then, we should definitely get into the Australian politics and the elections and everything. So after this all happened, you were kicked out of the LNP. You were the figure of hate in the Australian media for a whole week or so. And what happened then? So you got kicked out of the LNP. You're working for MP at the time. What was his name again?
Yes,
I remember who he is. Andrew Lemming.
Yeah. So Andrew Lemming was my boss. So I worked with him in the aftermath. And for a lot of people listening, I know people often deride the idea of being a political staffer. I will say it's a role that definitely allows you to get a greater breadth of politics. A lot of people who think, I'm going to study politics at uni, and that'll allow me to be a politician in the future. By no means is that the path to go ahead if you want to be involved in politics. You got to get out there in the community, and that's what MPs do. When you're working for an MP, you are literally getting out there in the community. You are dealing with people's menial issues. You are dealing with things like can't connect to the NBN, can't connect to Centrelink, can't connect to everything under the sun. And you're also dealing with things like scandal. And myself and Andrew are, of course, prone to scandal. But look, I'm of the
That's
opinion
one way
now,
of saying it. That's one way of saying it.
And maybe this is a devious viewpoint, Andrew, but in my opinion, people who are prone to scandal, whenever I read about people who are scandalous or maverick, in my opinion, it means more of a good thing than a bad thing nowadays. It means someone who's willing to break the mold and speak out a lot. And that's why, and I'm not, this seems like a long bow to draw, but this is why people give so many free passes to someone like Trump, right? Because, he makes all these faux pas, he says all these controversial things, but people look at him and say, you know what, at least he's still out there. He's still having a crack. They believe at the end of the day that he's on their side. And look, I want to hone in on one point just really quickly. And this to me was so hilarious, but it actually made me think about it. There's this misnomer in politics that the moment a disaster happens, that the politician, for some whatever reason, needs to go to the site of the crash or the site of the shooting or the scene of the accident and pose there and show how disappointed and they have to script how angry they are or how sad they are by the event. Trump was actually asked in the wake of that tragic plane crash, with the Black Hawk helicopter in Washington, D.C., which tragically and remarkably I was able to hear in the United States when I was living in Washington, D.C., yeah.
Wow.
And when that happened, in the subsequent days, Trump was questioned by a reporter saying, Mr. Trump, are you going to go to the scene of the crash? And he says, what, so you want me to go for a swim? You want me to go in the water and have a swim and have a look at the crash? And, that's a simple thing to say. It's hilarious. But you actually think about it. He actually cut through all this crap, all the decades that we've seen of politicians going and laying a wreath at the scene of the crash or saying, I'm here at ground zero. Counts for nothing, by the way. They're not clearing rubble.
Listen, Barclay, I still think it's a good thing to show respect. I still think it was wrong, but I mean, look, Trump. I'm a big critic of Trump, but I do find him funny. I do have to say he's funny. And you're right that people, they do give him, endless opportunities to, get past a billion infinity scandal. That's very interesting, and probably even. It's funny. I think part of it is a refusal to let yourself be cancelled. And probably even in my case, I've had a billion cases where people wanted to cancel me and I just didn't really roll over and die and I'm still kicking. And it's probably the same with you, Barclay. I think it is probably, that's the funny thing, right? Like even when this all happened, I was much more on the left then. And, our views are still quite different, but I probably just understood what it was like to be pilloried in the media and have a lot of people just like hating you and all that stuff. And I obviously remembered what happened with Wilson, which was horrific, right? It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. I think when young people are subjected to the massive piling on, like not everybody, that's not something that most people are prepared for that, right? Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that this is probably, people often ask me, Barclay, you've been involved since a young age. I've really been involved and politically conscious for 10 years. I'm 25. But one thing I will say is my viewpoint has definitely shifted on something like mental health. Just to talk seriously for a second, I've never had mental health issues. I know that would be many times where it would be beneficial for me to come out there and say that I'm having mental health issues. But I'm going to be honest, I've never had any mental health issues, anxiety, inability to sleep. Nothing of the sort. Never been scared.
You don't strike me as somebody who is loses any sleep, Barclay.
Not at all. No. But one thing I will say is that I definitely used to be of the opinion that whenever I'd hear someone who was depressed, I would almost try and talk them out of it and say, look at how lovely it is to be around. We're in Australia, we're the lucky country. Think about how bad things are across the world, and just snap out of it basically. But one thing I'm realizing, you look at the data backs this up, that depression is disproportionately a problem in wealthy countries. And it's a shame that it took something as tragic as the passing of our mutual friend Wilson Gavin for me to realize this. But yeah, it is often the people who don't speak up or the people who are bravest in a circle that tragically take their own lives. So look, that's something where my opinion has definitely shifted, that, mental health is a massive issue in society. Now, the reasons as to why mental health is an issue in society impacts a lot of men. But yeah, definitely men. And I'm so stoked that through the initiative of the Wilson Gavin Gala Ball, which is this year in its 5th edition, we've raised nearly $20,000 for youth mental health organisations. And yeah, hopefully making a difference on that topic. It's not something I see as overtly political, but it's something that I'm passionate about for sure.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Like it's something that really affects young men in particular. So it's important to talk about. So you went through that experience where you lost your job. You were absolutely kind of smashed in the media and everything. Your next bout of cancellation was the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, right? And do you want to explain to the viewers what happened there? Yeah,
definitely.
Well, explain to the viewers what happened there.
Yeah, a lot of viewers would be familiar with Kyle Rittenhouse. So Kyle was, well, in my opinion, he was someone who was trying to defend private property, which is one of the greatest, I guess, rights that we've had. That was, that anyone can have in a civilized society. Truly, it gives you your own fiefdom, your own ability to say, this is my own patch and I can do here what I want. Now, Kyle Rittenhouse was someone who was living in the United States at the time of the, death of George Floyd. And as you can imagine, during the Black Lives Matter era, there were mass riots on the streets. And I think it was in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was a guy who basically got on the phone and said to all his friends, hey, I've got a business on the main street, Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's about to be rioted. It's about to be looted. It's about to be burnt down. Please come and help me defend it. And as we know, in American culture, the way you defend things is with your Second Amendment. So Kyle, a lot of people say that he was under 18, so he shouldn't have even had a gun. That's a different argument. Kyle went with a number of other people to go and stand on the top of the dealership to essentially ward off people who are looking to come down the main street and riot and loot. And before long, they became swarmed. It became clear that they could no longer defend the dealership. And as a result, he climbed down, was on a run, running away from these vicious protesters. Of course, he was armed, but he wasn't going to go and do an open skirmish. But before long, he's a big guy, pudgy guy, no different to me. And he fell down as he was running down, right? He's running down the road. And he was just about to be gutter stomped or smacked by a skateboard by two vicious protesters before he decided to, open up his gun and shoot both of them stone cold dead. And for that, as you can imagine, the headline that CNN and other left-wing media news outlets chose to report was that, white supremacists came and shot people at a Black Lives Matter rally, which sounds like he's a white supremacist, which sounds like he's a mean, evil, nasty racist. But of course, the judgment came out and he was innocent on all 9 counts. Now, this is a guy who was, I think, 17, 18 at the time. His life will never be the same. Now, a lot of people say, well, he was found innocent, but this guy cannot go out in public anymore. I'm just going to make that sink in. He will not be able to go and live a normal life. There's no job at McDonald's for Kyle Rittenhouse. He is simply unemployable for the rest of his life. And as a result, I said, stuff it. I mean, I'm a guy, as I said, looks similar. And we had a Halloween party and I went dressed as him. Someone who I think was 100% wrongly cancelled by the media and someone who actually stood up in self-defense. And that was found in a court of law. So that's the way I see it. But of course, the media didn't see that in this country, and I got cancelled for it again. So yeah,
I have to point out here, Barclay. I mean, look, he was somebody who, I mean, obviously, rioting is horrible, and the courts found in the end that he was acting in self-defense. But was it really a smart idea to get dressed up as somebody who, at the end of the day, did kill 2 people? I mean,
not a smart idea, really? But I didn't know that Halloween costume criteria was only people who've made smart ideas in life or smart choices. And in my opinion, if a Halloween costume scares you, makes you laugh, excites you, shocks you, that's a good Halloween costume. It's not necessarily endorsement of people. When people go dressed as Ned Kelly, they're not thinking about the police officers that he killed back in the 1800s. They're thinking of the folklore of Ned Kelly. So, I think it's obviously it's something that I put my foot in again. But when we're young, we make mistakes. We do things that are not advised. So,
here's a good question: would you, if you could go back, do your time all over again, would you do both of those things as you did it? The Schoolies video and also the Kyle Rittenhouse one?
Well, I take a very laissez-faire view to not only the economy, but also my life. And I really do think that so many things are left outside of the realm of, kind of revisionist intervention. So my kind of thing is, no, I don't think I would have done them differently. They're not things that I, truly regret. And I think the message that came out of them was a broader discussion. Yes, we do need to have a discussion about people who are, found guilty by the media. Guilt by media is a big issue in this country. We saw that with Cardinal George Pell, whose conviction was overturned on the High Court of Australia in a unanimous decision. And also, if you go back to the Schoolies video, the issue of Indigenous affairs in this country, the fact that, yes, it's now coming out that the vast majority of Australians think that welcome to countries are way too overdone, and that people who trample on our Australian flag are not people who love this country. They're people who actually hate this country. And that's what you see on days like Australia Day. There are people who they don't actually want a better country. They truly just hate Australia. And they'll talk about things like abolish Australia Day. They're not talking about changing the date for making people feel better. These people are professional protesters. Drew, you and I went to university where we saw the socialist alternative. They were the same people rocking up to the climate change march, the Palestine march, the Stop Save Australia Day, the Change Australia Day march. They're the same people. It's a renter crowd. They love the optic of them holding up a loudspeaker and saying, we the people, solidarity. That's what they love. That's what they're feeding off. We cannot continue to feed these people and treat them as though they're organic members of the public campaigning for a widely popular issue. They are sectarian. They're a cult. And, we need to, just acknowledge that, I think.
Look, it's actually so funny that you mentioned this because I, of course, was actually like a professional protester at one point. I mean, I was like a professional protester against the Chinese government and everything. And the funny thing is, like, at one point, like, I disrupted the Wimbledon final and everything. But I actually I guess just like growing up, like, I feel like I just slowly came to view that, like disruptive protest tactics are like not actually, a good thing. Like, it actually just pisses everyone off. It puts people against your cause. That's just my personal stance, right? And you're absolutely right. Like the social alternative, they are really rabid and hardcore people. That they are basically a cult at the University of Queensland and all universities across Australia. So for people who don't know them, they are one half of the Victorian Socialists. The Victorian Socialists, I think, is an alliance of, I think it's the Social Alternative and the Social Alliance groups, two Trotskyist groups that have had splinters over the years or whatever. And Social Alternative are at every university in Australia, and they profit off this stuff. Like they organize on campuses, they sell $200 tickets to Australian Marxist conferences and all this trash. And they're very radical people. And every Australia Day, they literally go out on the streets and call for the abolition of Australia Day. And look, that's another interesting thing. And we got a comment by Landier. The Victorian Socialists have announced yesterday their plan is to go national, so they're going to create the National Socialist Party. That's very, very interesting name, of course. I was going to say, right, when it comes to this stuff, even my own personal trajectory, Barclay, like back in 2019, I was a full change the date type person, and honestly, I've now fully changed to the view that just looking at the way that the protests exists on Australia Day, it's no longer about changing the date. It's literally about abolishing Australia Day now, right? And they literally have protest signs saying abolish Australia. And it's pretty obvious that the whole end goal of it all is just, abolish the country and the nation state of Australia. And I'm against that. I'm fully against that. And it probably took me to, October 7 really woke me up to all this stuff because I realized like all these guys, I used to think of them all as sort of LARPers, like, whenever they said like, we're going to have a revolution, we're going to go around shooting people. I used to think like, oh, these guys are just a bunch of brats at university. Who cares? But then when October 7 happened, they massacred 1,000 people and all these people were celebrating it. Like they were saying this is what a revolution looks like. And they openly say like, this is what we want for Australia, right? Like they're pretty open about it. So my view has certainly changed on a lot of this stuff. I've become way more patriotic and I'm really against the whole, just abolish Australia movement now because it's a very sectarian movement. They want to destroy just unfortunately they want to destroy like the very basic fundamentals of our society.
Definitely.
Which is very sad.
Definitely. It's good to hear, Drew. And to be honest, I think you're with the majority of Australians. A lot of Australians, I do believe, have goodwill to genuine people who have concerns about climate change, who have concerns about Indigenous affairs, like changing the date, that kind of thing. But when they see them being perennial protesters and they realize, hang on, even if we did change the date, even if we did say that we need net zero in this country, nothing will ever be enough. You will still be out there protesting for the next available issue. You cannot continue feeding a beast that can never be satisfied. And that's what a lot of people are realizing. Maybe we segue this into the discussion about the federal election. I do believe, maybe there's some minor technicalities in election preference flows and things like that that contributes to it. But I do believe that was part of the reason why there was such a backlash to the Greens at this most recent federal election. We saw Brisbane and Griffith, a lot of people thought, the amount of times, and I think you're in Griffith, Drew, The amount of times we saw Max Chandler Mather out there in the community doing his barbecues, I'm thinking for sure this guy gets a swing towards him, and he barely had any.
I thought that too.
A lot of that was
negative 3%.
Yeah,
he actually had a 3% swing against him, which is crazy considering the amount of campaigning he did, which is actually crazy.
Yeah, and now to talk about the electoral nerd stuff, I think the reason I called that from a mile out is because I knew that the LNP would shift into third position in Griffith, and that would be the reason why Max would lose, because last time, of course, the LNP was second, so you redistribute those preferences. Now it's the other way around. So I almost thought that was technicality of this election. So, it actually is it was almost like a formality that it was the case that we would see the end of Max and Stephen Bates. The OnlyFans didn't work, so yeah.
The OnlyFans campaigning didn't work. I mean, look, they really. I think they. It's funny. I had a debate the other day with Braden from the Greens, who's a former Greens candidate, and he's very active on Twitter. And we had a debate, and I just put it straight up to him. I said, "Will you accept that, pushing to the left cost you the election?" And he just literally said, "No, like that's not at all the lesson of the election." Well, what is it then? Like, why did they literally have a 3% swing against them when Max was literally campaigning every day, like all this grassroots stuff in the entire in the community, but there was a massive swing against them. I was going to say to lend you here, I support Jan 1 as the national day. It's the nation's birthday, but 99% of the Change the Date brigade don't want a national day of celebration at all. And look, for me, that was the realization when I realized, 99% of these people, you could change the date and they'd still want to abolish it. So what can you do then? Yeah. I do want to say one thing, by the way.
Yep.
I want to say one thing. I know you mentioned the Welcome to Country thing on January 26th and how they got booed at the Anzac Day ceremony. I will say, I first want to preface this by saying, I do think that Welcome to Country ceremonies are just not appropriate at Anzac Day. I just straight up want to say that, right? Because it's kind of like, it's when you think about what a Welcome to Country ceremony actually involves, it's kind of like saying, you don't have a genuine or as genuine a connection to the land. And I actually think that's to be honest, I actually think that's kind of offensive. But I was going to say though, I think we should point out, it's important to point out the guys who did specifically do that booing at the Anzac Day ceremony in Melbourne, unfortunately it was actually the National Socialist Network guys, the guys who are actually neo-Nazi. That's horrible, right? I just wanted to preface that. But look, I do overall think, Welcome to Country is not appropriate at Anzac Day. And look, the more I think about it, I kind of think that Welcome to Country is almost like saying our connection to the land is not as legitimate, or it's like we have a lesser claim to the country. And I think that's a pretty toxic thing, to be honest. But sorry.
I just want to say as well, he came up on the screen before. It is good to have Andrew Landier on the podcast. Drew and I were both supporters of Kimberly Kitching, your wife.
She was a great lady. Great lady.
Yeah, tremendous woman. And it is a shame that she's no longer with us. But thank you so much for your comment. But look, I think people talk about the booing at the Anzac Day. I went to an Anzac Day service. Someone who's never served. I don't have any nearby relatives who've ever served, and God forbid, I don't think I would ever want to serve. If the time did come, of course I would. But the way I see it is, it's every Australian's duty, particularly every Australian male's duty, to go ahead and be at an Anzac Day dawn service, just to pay tribute to a lot of the diggers who serve. But on that topic, it is really unfortunate that the media went ahead and tarred these people, with that label. Whether it's true or not, I don't even know these people, right? But what I'm saying is that.
The particular guy who got arrested in Melbourne, his name's Jacob Hassan, and he was actually part of that group and everything. But going on, but I think the broader debate though, the broader debate's obviously a different thing.
It's a shame that muddied the conversation, because I think what they're standing up for, it's a classic thing of broken clock is is right twice a day, right? What they're standing up for is 100% the truth. 100% the truth in the sense that we shouldn't be having a Welcome to Country at a service when we're trying to honour people who've served our country. And the idea that people don't see the Australian flag and feel like they're represented within it is something which is really something to do with the woke mind virus. I don't think that people should be looking at that symbol and seeing that it's only for white people. That is so not true. It is for all people. It's a toxic way of viewing life. You're going to say something?
I was going to quickly say, look, I do think the act of booing at the Anzac Day ceremony is not appropriate because, it's a very somber occasion. I look. I guess I guess I'd say like I've got a kind of bland centrist take where I'm like, I think booing was not the right call, and obviously those guys in particular were actual Nazis. I don't like them at all. But when it comes to the actual broader question of welcome to country stuff, I just think there is a bit overdone. It is a bit overdone. Like I saw something on Twitter where like someone was talking about a welcome to country at a new Coles opening, and like you get it every time you land on a Qantas plane and stuff like that. And it gets to a point where it's a bit ridiculous. And my worry, right, is that unfortunately it kind of is. I feel like it's kind of saying to people like your claim to the land is like lesser, and I think that's actually wrong. Like it is actually, I think, kind of a sectarian thing, unfortunately.
Definitely. And let's also not pretend that it's a crystal clear view of history either. There was an issue in WA when former Premier Mark McGain was looking to open a new stretch of highway. And, being a new stretch of highway, of course, he needed a welcome to country. But what happened? Well, two rivaling tribes actually rocked up to initiate the welcome to country for Mark McGowan, and it ended up being a full-on fight between the two tribes. Now, I don't know if that fight was just verbal or if it descended into physical, but as a result, it actually delayed the opening of the highway. This is absolute pandemonium. It's craziness. I can't believe we're entertaining it in the year 2025. But look, I do think, median everyday Australians are now waking up and realizing that they've had a gutful. They're sick of this. And I really do think we have seen a market shift since The Voice. I know a lot of people will like to say that, The Voice was just about to change to the Constitution and, having this advisory body to Parliament. But let's be honest, I think it was much more than that. It'd be like saying that the most recent result of this federal election was just because of Peter Dutton. Let's be honest and let's be frank, it's a far deeper problem with, machinations in the Liberal Party, things like that. It can't just be attributed to one thing. So often when people are voting in a federal election, they're not just thinking, well, do I want this advisory body or not? No, a lot of people were voting in The Voice, I do believe, thinking, I'm thinking about that time where my kids' kindergarten got open with the welcome to country, and all of them had to, kneel and pay honours to the Dreamtime gods, and that's something I've honestly seen. That's something that's happened in Australian kindergarten. So that's what people were thinking.
It's inappropriate for kids.
Actually,
I want to say it's certainly inappropriate for kids, like with the kindergarten and stuff. Like I remember there was someone I was following on Twitter who said that their kid was going to preschool and they were being taught at the preschool that Australia was on stolen land and stuff like that. And look, just I want to say I do feel really sympathetic to Indigenous Australians. Obviously, there's a really big problem with the conditions that they face across the country. There's a lot of poverty, especially in the Northern Territory and stuff like that. It's a horrible situation. And look, I also acknowledge I also want to say this is unfortunately the history of the entire world, right? Every nation has, terrible things happen in its past. No country ever has this beautiful, perfect history. But to just tell kids, preschool kids that, you're on stolen land, it's my whole problem with it, right, is that if you're telling people that it's stolen land, then the idea is if it's stolen, it has to be returned, right? You can't just say, you stole my wallet, but you can keep my wallet, right? I feel like the whole end goal of it is to say we have to dismantle the whole structure of Australia. And a lot of the activists actually do say that, and they go, the end goal is to dismantle Australia. And I really am opposed to that massively, right?
No, definitely. No, I agree. It's something that's very corrosive, and it's something that I'm hoping to push back. Maybe this is a natural transition. Since coming back from the United States, I was over there for 6 months. I've just started off. This is a very prolonged introduction, of course. I'm sorry I'm going back to that. Everyone who wants to get on the media.
We'll have to talk about the America stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, tell us about your American thing. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So for 6 months I was over there. I was very fortunate enough to get a job with a lobbying group called the Australian Taxpayers Alliance is who I was working for in Australia, but Americans for Tax Reform is who I was working for over in America. An incredible organisation, a group that opposes all tax increases as a matter of principle. And for me, it was very fulfilling as someone who does love politics to work for an organisation where I never felt like I was going back or betraying on my values. So many people who they go work for a Big Four accounting firm, they work for any kind of corporate law group in the CBD, they kind of have to bite their tongue through all the HR initiatives, all the work stuff. Working at a group like Americans for Tax Reform, we never had any of that, and I was able to write and advocate for issues that I was passionate about, and that is people paying lower tax. And that really was my initial
I just want to say
introduction
one
into
thing.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We've got a comment here saying both of these guys are straight racists. I wonder where exactly that comes from, because all I've said, right, is I just said that Australia should exist as a country and it shouldn't be like dismantled. That's all I've said in this entire chat, right? But interesting. Yeah, you go.
No,
you go,
it would actually be interesting to see if in the 1,000,000th time that I'm called a racist, where I actually get into a corner and cry and say, "Wow, my gosh, I can't believe how bad I am." Right? It's amazing. Maybe on the 1,000,000th time, it might actually work. So keep going, Proctor. Keep using labels. That's the best way to use and diffuse an argument that someone is, maybe giving you an alternate viewpoint, and maybe you'll learn something. But if you have to keep using labels and that makes you feel comfortable, you're more than welcome. The chat room is always open. And Drew, don't you dare censor any of those comments.
I'm actually not. I'm not. Yeah, I'm literally not.
Fantastic.
I'm actually putting them on the screen. I'm actually putting them on the screen.
Of course, brilliant. Well, Proctor, you can say that, brother.
What the fuck's this comment? Drew is a flake. Still owes me $70 after years waiting for an Asian artifact he never delivered. What the fuck is he even talking about? Tried to blame me on the payment person.
I don't want to go into your private business dealings. Is this a euphemism?
I don't even know what that's talking about.
No,
I literally don't even know. But yeah, you keep going.
Yeah, continuing the discussion. I mean, I got back from the United States after working for Americans for Tax Reform, and I just started a new job with a group called CPAC Australia. CPAC Australia have existed since 2019. Of course, they're an offshoot of the American CPAC, which is one of the largest gatherings of conservatives in America, and we're looking to emulate that in Australia. Now, does this mean we are all MAGA fans, or does that mean we're all Trump fans? No, not necessarily. A lot of people who are Trump fans will, of course, attend. But we're looking for this to be uniquely and distinctly Australian movement. And what does that mean? Well, it means platforming Australian conservatives, people like Jacinta Price, people like Matt Canavan, and people like Andrew Hastie. So we're going to be hosting our big annual conference September 20. I've already got a cheeky plug in there, Drew. So if anyone's keen to attend, September 20, it's in Brisbane. The greatest city on the planet. And Drew, maybe you might even be welcome there, Drew, because you've had an epiphany over the last few years.
Look, I still don't call myself an out-and-out right-winger. I might go as a journalist and investigate. This person's like, I've got your message. Like, please tell us what the Asian artifact is. We've got a very funny comment by Landy. I bought with that Asian artifact for $80. Very happy with it. Thank you, Drew. Very funny.
Drew, you have some interesting characters.
Very funny comments in the chat. And look, it's actually going good. We've got 50 live viewers, which is actually really good. 50 on YouTube, and I think 20 watching live on Twitter, which is good. So you're in America. This is where we should get to a bit of a debate and discussion, right, Barclay? So I know you're a very libertarian guy. Like, you love Milton Friedman. I know you love Milei in Argentina. To be honest, I've got a lot of respect for Milei. I love the fact that he's pro-Ukraine and everything. So I know you're a very libertarian guy. You're on economic stuff. You're economic libertarian and everything. How do you then take, a lot of this Trump stuff where, it's very much anti-economic libertarianism, right? I mean, some of the tariffs look like, if you're talking about targeted tariffs against some of the strategic industries in China, I actually agree with targeted tariffs on some of this for national security grounds. You can't have completely unlimited free trade, obviously. But this is where I guess I stand, right? Like, my whole thing would be, I want free trade for our friends and our allies, and then we just maybe put, tariffs and sanctions on, dictatorships that are opposed to us. Trump does put tariffs on allies. He does put tariffs on friends and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, right, like, as an economic libertarian, how do you deal with that?
Well, definitely. I mean, the question is you don't deal with it and you actually call it out. And I'm
so you are against it.
I'm very outspoken against tariffs. Okay. Yeah, outspoken against tariffs. Now, I will say that I think, it's, to me, tariffs are kind of like nuclear weapons, right? In the sense that you don't ever want to use them, but you always want to have your, even your allies and your adversaries always having the thought in the back of their mind that you could indeed use them. Because I do think that the ability and the threat of the US imposing tariffs has encouraged other countries to act. I mean, look at Canada, look at Mexico. The simple idea that during the Biden administration, we could have somehow had not only a solid southern border being manned by American troops, but actually Mexican armed guards manning the southern border was unfathomable. But you fast forward to Trump, he threatens things like tariffs, and all of a sudden the new Mexican president is saying, oh my goodness, we will now help you protect the southern border. Because let's not forget, a border is a mutual thing. It shouldn't just be a case that the United States is protecting its own border. It should be mutually protected by also Mexicans stopping people from illegally trespassing from their country. So, look, I think that, tariffs as a negotiating tool have been proven to be effective, but boy, oh boy, these reckless tariffs based off trade deficits is mind-numbing. It is dumb. And I think it's really important. But this is, and it feels crazy, and people say, oh, here's the Trump apologist again. But the reason why people even economic libertarians extend such an olive branch to Trump is because you've seen it in recent days. He's walking it back. He's tinkering at the edges. What you're getting is someone who is truly
a lot of
cognizant.
damage, though. A lot of damage was made.
A lot of damage.
Yeah.
Well, let's make no mistake. People say they want a political outsider. You don't just get the political outsider without the baggage. A guy who's never tinkered. He's never actually seen what's happened in the past. He's never really gone to these negotiating tables as a Secretary of State in the past. He's not someone who's played this game in the past. He's someone who looks at a deal on its merits and thinks, is it working? Is it not working? He's not divinely wed to the idea of tariffs. I truly believe he is now walking them back because he's seeing that they're not having the economic benefits that he thought. Again, he could be far more solid on this issue, and I really do hope that he keeps them targeted towards China to root out unethical supply chains. Things like that are a far more better way to use tariffs instead of impacting American businesses, which use a lot of foreign-made goods as intermediaries for final goods that are then sold in the United States and jacking up prices for Americans. So, it's absurd economic logic to think that any economist would come on and defend broad sweeping tariffs. But look, I really do think people extend him the olive branch because they're like, you know what? He's in there thinking, what's the best deal for America? Let's now, and I hate to go back to him, but let's go back to Biden for a sec. This is a guy who, and I know maybe this is going to open Pandora's box, Zelensky would come over to America and he would say to Joe Biden,
I love Zelensky. I love Ukraine, but you go on.
I know. He would come to Joe Biden and say, can we have some money for military aid and humanitarian aid? And he would say, how much do you need, Zelensky? And Zelensky would say, $400 billion. And Biden would say, yeah. Wouldn't even bat an eyelid. Now, whether or not you think it's $400 billion, it should be $100 billion, it should be zero, is beside the point. The very question is that Joe Biden took every single world leader's idea at face value. Why? Because he was just hoping to coast through for 4 years. And for a while there, he was hoping to coast through for 8 years, right? At least Trump looks at a figure like $400 billion. He tries to negotiate it. He tries to think, well, actually, how much of that are you going to use? And he's looked at all the money that we've given to Ukraine over this period of time, and he doesn't think that we have much to show for it. And quite frankly, I agree with him. Now, does that mean that I'm pro-Russia? No, it does not mean I'm pro-Russia. Do I hope Ukraine do win the war? Of course I do. But it can't just be a meat grinder that we're inadvertently funding of getting people to, go ahead and invade Russia. And if it means that Russia take a small portion of the Donbass and as a result we stop people dying from both sides, that needs to be something that's weighed up. This can't be a win at all costs. I mean, we are not bloodthirsty warmongers. And let's not be like Vladimir Putin and, actually shake your hand and realize, well, look, this has caused tremendous bloodshed on both sides. We need to stop that bloodshed. That needs to be the sole criteria. Finally, Trump is the one reorienting that discussion and, putting American taxpayers first. I think that's important.
Listen. Let's obviously we can have a big debate on this. It'll be interesting. I've got a funny comment here. The legendary troll duo from UQ. That's very funny. I do like this comment by Lendu. I mean, when you say that the tariffs were just a negotiating condition, I think that undersells it a bit because I think for Trump it was pretty ideological and maybe he walked it back because there was sell-offs in the bond market. People got very nervous. Like when you have comments like from Trump where he goes, kids don't need $30, you buy 3 instead, as Landy points out. I mean, that seemed to be coming from like a place that is very, his whole idea was sometimes you subordinate the economy to the nation, even if that leads to, economic decline or less GDP and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It is certainly something that an ordinary libertarian would not necessarily agree with. Now, when
I 100% disagree. And can I just say that, the beauty of something like, a free trade and things like that is that we can have an abundance of goods and you can have your $30. Now, people will say, Barclay, it's not about the dollars. That's just kind of a reductionist way of viewing it. And yes, we do know, you call it ideological. I think Trump does have a nostalgia and he keeps on going back to William McKinley for this time period when the entire US government was run off tariffs. Now, if Trump does have tariffs and the trade-off is reducing income tax or abolishing it altogether, that is the study I would like to read. I think that would be quite interesting. But he does have this nostalgia and this thought that if we go back to the 1920s when we were funded entirely by tariffs, that you'd bring jobs back. Now, the issue between 1920s and 2020s is we now have technology. And that when you open a steel mill, when you open a car manufacturing plant, you haven't got people working 9-to-5 jobs. I don't know why anyone aspire to that job anyway. Apparently, it's nostalgic to have a job that is miserable and miserly in hot conditions. But no, all you're doing is you're paying for people to sit at a massive factory, employ 5 people, and click a button to get a machine to do the thing. You aren't bringing jobs back by bringing back manufacturing. That's my unashamed view. And Trump has this nostalgic view that you're going to get this, covered in soot, worker coming home to a lovely lady with cake of makeup on her face, polka dot dress, dinner's ready, honey. This is the kind of nostalgia he's longing for, but I don't think it's going to eventuate. People don't want to work those jobs anymore. And thankfully, and I'm a technocrat. I'm someone who believes that it is fantastic that we have technology on our side to make our lives easier. Now, there are, of course, pitfalls, but on the whole, these are good developments that we should not try and run away from. And that's why I personally, and I'm still a massive Elon Musk fan, and I really do wish, Trump would take more of his intuition from Elon Musk. I think it's disappointing that, there was always going to be a rift, let's be honest. But, I do really think that, Elon Musk is, solid, at least on this issue. He really views technology as a way to make all of our lives easier in the long run. So, automation, I say go right ahead.
I was going to say, look, actually very well said there. I do want to see manufacturing return to the West. I think we need to have that. We need to have a base level of manufacturing for national security purposes. So obviously, full-blown libertarianism and this stuff is not necessarily my position. But at the end of the day, I do think you're right. And it is actually pretty well said when you're talking about Trump, there was a point where I think it was like Howard Lutnick or something. And this was a really strange moment where he got on TV and he said, "Oh, we're going to bring back. There's going to be millions and millions of people like turning screws in factories in America." And it was like a really outdated view of manufacturing because like these days the cutting edge of manufacturing, those jobs don't look like that anymore. Like this is really stuff from the 60s and the 70s, and like that's why the Soviet Union collapsed. Like Soviet Union collapsed because they had Soviet industrial plant architecture that was like 50 years out of date by the end of it, right? You've definitely, unfortunately, you have to have some level of creative destruction in the economy. I do think there was too much outsourcing to China. I do think, I think they need to bring back a lot of it from China. But the way he's done it, taxing, for example, one of the stupidest things about it was that they were going to tax the inputs that American manufacturers actually needed to put into creating manufactured goods in America, which is just a complete disaster. So, look, the funny thing is, I think we actually agree on a lot of this. What I was going to say, right, and also I want to say, kudos to you for being able to criticize Trump, because one of my criticisms has been that, unfortunately, I think there is too much cult-like behavior on the right, where people just literally make an excuse for anything he ever says, even if it's something, even if it's against, what they said 6 months ago. So, for example, like you had someone like Scott Johnson, I think his name is, and like he's one of the biggest sort of MAGA influencers. And 6 months ago, he was attacking Kamala, going, they put up the grocery prices, they're killing the economy.
Is it Benny Johnson?
Benny Johnson, sorry, Benny Johnson.
Yeah.
He put up, he was saying lots of funny stories about Benny Johnson, but I heard he gets up to it was very interesting stuff in his personal life. But who told me that, Barclay? It's very interesting. Milo Yiannopoulos told me that. But Milo Yiannopoulos.
Well, I can only imagine what those interesting things are that he gets up to into his private life.
Anyway, I won't go into it. But Benny Johnson, he put out a statement where he literally was like, what did he say? He said, everybody, money isn't the root of all happiness. You should be willing to lose some money for, greater meaning and stuff like that. And it was just so hypocritical because 6 months ago, they were going Trump's going to bring back the stock market. Trump's going to lower grocery prices. And then suddenly he comes out and he's like, you should just accept losing your 401k. So I think I had a period where I was using the term MAGA Maoism, where I was kind of mocking the cult-like element, where there were some parts of the MAGA movement where they were literally saying we should accept lower living standards or lower consumption and stuff like that in order to help Trump, which I thought was pretty nuts. But listen, what I want to I do want to get into
No, I agree.
Look, it's funny because it's interesting that we can both agree on that. I do want to get into the Ukraine thing with you. Listen, I understand the whole perspective. We want to end the war, and listen, I was there 3 months ago, and honestly, my impression is that I think everyone in Ukraine understands that they're not going to be able to. Unfortunately, this is the sad reality that they're not going to be able to reconquer Crimea and stuff like that. So I think people have understood that, right? But this is where the problem lies. The people would end the war on the current lines of control if there were security guarantees. But that's not what's on the offer. That's not what is on offer right now. And you saw Trump actually start to realize this even over the past week or two. There's been some moments where Trump is making more sympathetic comments to Ukraine, because what is happening, sadly, is Russia's the one that is actually rejecting the ceasefire proposals right now. And I think the reason for that is this. There's been no pressure applied to Russia to try and end the war. They're thinking that if they just keep it going, it's in their favor. So they want to keep things going. Massive domestic incentive for Putin to keep the war going indefinitely, because he's reoriented the entire Russian economy to be basically a war economy. So remember how everyone was talking about the Russian economy would collapse because of the sanctions. The reason that hasn't happened is because he put in place basically a full total war economy. That's why there is some level of, there's really bad problems in the Russian economy with inflation and stuff like that. They're really running at the highest red hot rate you could ever have right now. They are facing a cash crunch in the months ahead. And they rely on high oil prices. It's not all rosy for them. But the main reason why Western estimations of Russia's economy have basically been incorrect. People thought that they would be out of the war by now. The main reason why is because Putin put in place a full total war economy. What that means, though, the flip side to that is that because Putin has put in place a total war economy, he can't then end the war without then risking his own grip on power. Because if he were to end the war right away, he recognizes now, having reoriented the entirety of Russian society and the economy, that his hold on power now depends on that war basically being ongoing into the future. And they've said over and over again that they will not stop at the Donbass and Crimea. They keep on saying they basically want the whole of Ukraine. So that's where I'm actually saying, like, listen, I actually understand the whole impetus to end the war. I actually, if we could get a deal right now where you froze things where they are right now, unfortunately, like, in my heart of hearts, I would love for Ukraine to get back the occupied territories. It's so unjust what Russia has done. But if there was a way where we could freeze things right now and stop the killing, I think everyone in Ukraine would probably take that. The problem is that Russia is actually the one that's blocking the deals right now. Russia wants to keep going. There's all this incentive for Putin to keep going. It's very ideological for them. They think in terms of Ukraine not being a real country. You know, you watch the Tucker Carlson. If you watch that Tucker Carlson interview with Putin, like, Tucker keeps on bringing up NATO to Putin, and this is the line that people in the West who are critical of Ukraine will always bring up, because it's probably the most. I mean, it's probably the argument that people understand the most, right? From a Western perspective, the argument about NATO, it makes more sense to people than the Russia eternal empire myth, right? So Tucker kept on trying to steer the conversation back to, let's talk about tariffs. Tucker kept on steering the conversation. Let's talk about NATO. Let's talk about NATO expansion, stuff like that. But if you watch that interview that he did, it was 2 hours. Putin keeps on moving away from that and keeps on going, no, let me give you a whole 1,000-year history lesson on Ukraine. I'm not even kidding. He literally goes back to like 1000 AD and he says, it all started where Russia and Ukraine.
It was quite bizarre. Yeah. It was bizarre.
Yeah. I know you would have seen it too. So that's my take, right? Like, I understand that people end the war. I want to end the war too. But how do you actually do that without putting any pressure on Russia at all? And they have this very big ideological movement to just conquer Ukraine. They just don't see it as a real country.
Yeah, I think that a lot of your assessment is accurate. And I think that, you've obviously been over to Ukraine, so you've seen parts of it. But in many ways, the idea of, foreign wars, and you can even talk about the Israel-Palestine issue as well, even though that is a different issue. But the way I kind of view it is on a topic like, similar to a topic like net zero. Now, if I could switch my fingers tomorrow and we could become net zero, I would do it. If I could snap my fingers tomorrow and we could solve the conflict in the Middle East, solve the conflict in Ukraine, Russia, we would do it. At least no one who is, accepted in the political mainstream within the Overton window in Australia is wanting, Russia to win, right? But my issue is
unfortunately, one thing. John Ruddock, unfortunately, the Libertarians, for some reason, he actually seems to want Russia to win. I actually have no idea why.
That's interesting. I'm seeing John later this year. I should chat to him about that. But my issue is, comparing to net zero, is the inevitable discussion that comes after you agree. Oh yeah, net zero would be good. Oh yeah, ending the wars would be good. It's like, oh, pay up. Oh, here, put people into a meat grinder. That's where the issue needs to be discussed, right? What is Australia's role? How much do we want to contribute? Okay, sure. We want Ukraine to win. Okay, sure. We want Israel to win. Oh, but at what cost? Wait. We have to give hundreds of billions? Whoa. Slow down. Like, this is ridiculous. We cannot continue just pumping money into foreign wars and foreign conflicts when we've got issues to focus on back home. Now, I think that you make some good observations about like Putin, and I do think that yes, once you're in a total war economy, you can't just say, "Oh crap, war over, let's go back to normal life." It's kind of all of nothing. He staked his entire leadership on this war. I do take that point, but another thing that I'm also conscious of, and I know you've been there on the ground, so maybe it's a little bit different, but all of us are getting our information from the media, and maybe call me conspiratorial, call me red-pilled on this issue, but I am 100% skeptical on military-industrial complex, and the reason why is because every time when I go and see, someone talk about foreign politics, someone talk about foreign affairs, they always say, beat the drums of war. They say, "Oh, we're very close. Maybe give it 2-3 years. We're in a hot war with China." They never eventuate. They're never as bad as people are saying. And I think a lot of the times we see that conflicts are a lot worse or the worst in history. Why? Because there's greater media coverage the world wide over. And, now we've all got X, and you can see something 2 minutes after it happened on the other side of the world, and everyone's viewing it. So, I really do think that there are so many people who profiteer off this war ongoing. And now I'm not saying that you've been sucked into that, Drew, and maybe a lot of the points you make are quite astute. But whenever I hear some kind of discussion about, we need to keep on funding, I'm always skeptical of, a lot of people do benefit out of us continuing to fund it. And when I lived in the United States, I lived not far from Virginia, and the size of groups like Rheinmetall, like Lockheed Martin, all of these groups is remarkable. These groups make squillions. I think there was a common stat that I used to always use in debating, and maybe when I did debating over in the US in maybe 2015, 16, and there was something like 14.5% of every US taxpayer dollar went to Lockheed Martin. And you best believe that a lot of those.
True. I don't think that's true.
Like 14, no, it's an old. No, I said it's an old stat. It's an old stat, like 10 years ago, right? Maybe it's even going back to Bush days, right?
I know off the top of my head that I think the US government takes in about $4 trillion in tax receipts every year, and I know that like the US military budget is about like 800-900 billion, but Lockheed Martin wouldn't even be, like they wouldn't even be a majority of the budget. So I have to say I don't think that was true, but I get your point though. Yeah, like sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find the stat. Yeah, people can search it up, maybe fact check me. There was a study that definitely went out. Yeah.
Can I respond to the media point? Look, I understand what you're saying, Barclay, but I want to say this, right? And again, I'm not trying to like. Obviously, I've been there. I'm not trying to like flex the fact that I've been there, right? But I did see some pretty crazy stuff when I was there. So when I was there, right, I went to a town called Dobropilya, which is about 20 Ks back from the front line in the Donbass. And like, Russia's been fighting over the Donbass for 11 years now. Like, it's crazy that they still haven't conquered the entirety of the Donbass in 11 years. I went to this town in the Donbass and Dobropilya, and I was there 2 days after Russian Iskander ballistic missile hit a Khrushchevka, like an old kind of like Soviet-style apartment complex. And there were, dozens and dozens of apartments that were just completely incinerated. I saw the crater in the ground 10 meters deep from the Russian Iskander ballistic missile. They're scary. They're very fucking scary. And Russia produces more than 1,000 of them a year. And, if you're just anywhere near that, you're just dead. And they then hit the place with a double tap strike. So they did a cluster munition strike to hit the first responders. So they waited for the firefighters and the ambulances to arrive. Then they did a double tap, and they, it was a massacre. I think the minimum number of people who died was about 14. But the sad reality is that this is what I was actually going to say to you, right, Barclay? Like, so I know that there's a standard line that a lot of people assume that, the war in Ukraine is overdone to justify like the military industrial complex. And a lot of people have that view because, obviously they were sold down the river with the Iraq war and everything and the war on terror. Listen, the reality is, from what I saw, right, it's actually, if anything, it's actually underplayed in the media how bad it is in Ukraine. So when I saw the Dobropilya aftermath, I was there 2 days later. There was still smoke in the air. There were families lining up with kids to get supplies from the UN and stuff like that outside the Dobropilya, outside the apartment block. Like the official number of 14 dead was probably not an accurate figure. I saw the impact of the cluster munitions. They're like, basically you see like bolt holes and you see like little shrapnel pieces, right? Like pieces of the wall torn out this size, right? Like a circular torn out of the wall. And you see that literally for a block square. So literally going 500 meters in each direction, you can just see pellets out of the walls everywhere. These were, superheated shrapnel, just blanketed the area. Anyone who was sitting outside just dead immediately. I saw the children's playground next to the apartment block. And I filmed all this. Like, you can watch it on my YouTube channel. There was a massive shard of glass, like the side of my arm, that had been thrown probably 50 meters into the. There was just shards of glass everywhere. It was horrible. The apartments were incinerated. Probably many, many more people were killed than the 14. What I learned from some of the International Legion guys that we were with, they said, listen, sometimes the Ukrainian government actually probably undercounts the death toll on these things because they don't want to hurt the civilian morale. They don't want the civilian population to, collapse with panic and stuff like that. So if anything, it's maybe undercounted some of the horrors that we're seeing over there. And what I was going to say as well, like that Dobropilya incident, this actually really had an impact on me, right? Because I filmed it all on my like Osmo Pocket 3. Like I filmed it all. I put it up on YouTube. It got like 2,000 views. And I was like, damn, no one in the West really cares about this war anymore. Like this was like literally, I was walking through literally like, just incinerated apartment blocks 2 days after it happened. And, there wasn't much interest in it. And when it came to Western media, like, Western media online, I think the New York Times literally devoted one paragraph to what happened in Dobropilya, like literally just one paragraph, like a couple sentences. I think there was one Western news organization that did a full article on it, DW News, which is German. But like, what I mean by that, right, is like, if anything, I actually feel like there's actually kind of like it's almost like a conflict fatigue in the West. And I actually think it's really immoral because we're not the ones who are suffering here, right? It's the Ukrainians who are suffering. And yet a lot of people who live these really comfortable lives in the West, we're all very lucky, right, in the West, that we live peaceful, comfortable lives. And, like we're the ones complaining about war fatigue. Oh, we're sick of the war in Ukraine. And it's like, these people are actually living it every day. Why I bring this all up, right, is if anything, I actually think the sad reality is that the Western media actually probably undercovers just how bad it is in Ukraine. And I think people have gotten like sort of sick of talking about the war, don't want to talk about it anymore, don't want to really focus on the atrocities. And so like, I know you were saying like there might be a sort of media narrative to kind of like push, conflict and everything, but it's just my personal, like what I saw in Dobropilya, right? Like I walked through the aftermath of a massacre just a couple of days after it happened. And there was basically like, there's one paragraph in the New York Times about that. And there was barely any coverage. And like I filmed it on YouTube, got 2,000 views. Like people it doesn't seem like the West actually really properly follows what's happening, right? This is just my take, right? And this is, at least I can say this, I guess, that was there.
I almost feel that, it's hard for me to, disagree with that. I mean, let's be real. You were on the ground. You saw it. You saw the rabble. Like it's awful. A war is awful. And anyone who says a war should be romanticized or something like that. Funnily enough, when I was actually over in the US at an IDU conference, International Democracy Union, I actually met Alexei Navalny's wife.
Oh, okay, wow.
This is just an interesting story. Of course, Alexei Navalny was, in my opinion, I don't care if I get sued, was poisoned by Vladimir Putin. And it was actually quite funny because this is a coalition of people from around the world, center-right movements from around the world. She was the only Russian there, but there was many Ukrainians there. And I said to the Ukrainians, thinking that, this is something I can show my knowledge, right? And I said, oh, how cool, Alexei Navalny's, wife. They despise her because he was very much on the same ticket of, Russia's side of the war, which I found, look, I still went and I got a photo with Julius. Yeah, I went and got a photo. And look, I don't weigh into it, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be all nationalistic here, but I struggle to care. If my empathy, Andrew, maybe all power to your arm, mate, because you do care about so many issues around the world. But I feel like it would just drive me crazy, and maybe it has driven you partially crazy too. Just obsessing with so many issues from around the world, I think it actually inhibits your own ability to function and lead a normal life. So look, I got a photo with Yulia. She was lovely to talk to. But yeah, it was also interesting hearing that Ukrainian perspective. But look, I'll just round out, right? It does feel like we are chatting on different parallels here. You're making the very true point that, Russia is the aggressor. It's far worse than what they're saying, and the media aren't covering it. And I'm making the very separate point of agree all of that. But the question is, how much do we fund it? How much do we continue sending aid? How much do we continue sending people into a meat grinder? In my opinion, the Biden administration went way overboard. They spent way too much. I don't think that their approach was in many ways.
I'm interested though. So what is there a concrete line you think that the Biden administration crossed? Like, for example, they shouldn't have delivered an X type of weapon or something like that. Like what would you have in concrete terms? How would you have rolled it back?
Well, I think it goes back to Biden himself, and it goes back to what I was talking about before. And maybe this is a cringe line, and maybe I'm going to be accused of being a MAGA for saying this, but we almost need to have an audit of the efficiency of foreign aid that we give to other countries. And in my opinion, that audit was just not happening anywhere, right? So Zelensky would come 1 year, next year, and there was no kind of like, okay, so what do we get on our investment? Because let's be honest, you're using American taxpayer dollars. You need to report back what the return on investment is. Now people say, it's not an investment. It's defending people.
Can I say one thing?
It's an investment. It's saving people's lives. How many lives did we save? How much did we, save Ukrainian territory? Yeah, but go ahead.
I want to say one thing here. There's actually two separate points that, right? First part is some of the aid is defensive in nature, right? So, for example, the Patriot missile batteries that defend Ukrainian cities. I mean, that is literally just like in concrete terms, that is literally just saving civilian lives. And one sad thing was I saw Trump say that he wouldn't even sell them to Ukraine, and I thought that was really immoral. Just to not even because Zelensky actually said we will take money from Europe and we'll buy them outright from America, and Trump apparently objected to that. I think that's immoral because that's a fully defensive system. The second thing I was going to say is there is actually a return on investment in the sense that the armored inheritance of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, you would know about this because, I mean, I know you like read into Soviet history and stuff like that. They had literally tens of thousands of armored tanks and armored vehicles and stuff like that that were just built up from the Cold War, right? And a lot of that, the armored inheritance has been basically shattered in Ukraine. Like the amount of Russian military equipment that has been destroyed in Ukraine is actually pretty shocking to consider. We're actually talking about tens of thousands of pieces of armored equipment, and that means that is stuff that would never be able to be used against Europe in the future. So I think that in itself is kind of defensive. And look, there is this comment by Landy here. He said, "How much did we invest in liberating Europe in World War II?" And I think that is probably the better way to see it. That's sort of how I see it, right? But I mean, how would you respond to that?
Well, the way I'd respond to it is that how many times are we going to have the number one issue at a US election or an Australian election be cost of living and have no one actually explain to us why that is the issue? The issue is because we have played this role of global policeman, which I actually don't think has done all the world of good. There's so many instances where the US involvement in foreign countries has actually created perverse incentives. There's of course the big name topics like Iraq, the withdrawal in Afghanistan, the Vietnam War. But you go back to more niche instances. There was instances where we were trying to root out the Boko Haram in Africa, and you try and institute aid initiatives in parts of Western Africa, and the aid institutions would be corrupted by the Boko Haram, and you actually ended up funding Boko Haram with 50% of your American aid. So, look, I'm all for the idea that American should try and expand its empire and should try and expand American values rather the world over. But look, I really think there needs to be more scrutiny on the cost. Like, how much do we need to be investing into these things? And Trump, as much as it seems like he does often overcompensate, there's a very, plausible point that, we've given way too much money to Zelensky in Ukraine, but now it doesn't mean that we'd be pro-Russia all of a sudden, right? He sometimes does overcompensate. Yeah, sometimes countries do rip us off, but it doesn't mean you need to put a 300% tariff on every other country. So he does overcompensate, but he's fine-tuning. And I do think, it sounds cliche, but we're not even 4 months in. I mean, this goes for 4 years. Can you believe he's going to be fine-tuning for 4 years, right? This is going to be incredible to see. It's someone who I truly don't believe he's I truly believe he's just trying to do what's in the best interest. I really look at him. You go ahead. Yep.
I want to say, firstly, I want to say shout out to Clem. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. The other thing I was going to say, right? I know you have been willing to criticize Trump on some things like the tariffs and stuff like that, and you will at least concede that he may have overcompensated by potentially going too pro-Russia, etc. Is there any one thing or set of things that Trump could do that would lose, like that would say you're an American citizen, right? Say you're an American citizen, you could vote. Is there anything that Trump could do or a set of things that he could do that would stop you from voting for Trump, like something that would actually fully turn you against him?
I think if he was to try and make himself a dictator, I mean, I know that's taking things to the nth degree, but I think if he was to call off elections, now I say this in two ways. Now, one thing I definitely disagree with Trump, and I was very outspoken about this at the time. I do believe he lost the US election. I do believe he lost in 2020. And I do think that was a massive cope. And I'm so glad that period is over. It took me a long time to get over it. But if he was to try and suspend elections, I would 100% turn my back towards him. By the same token, and maybe people will say, oh, he's trying to get out of it. By the same token, I do believe he ought to be able to run again. Because I do not believe in term limits. I actually believe they are anti-democratic. And I think that if he was to get... I believe...
So you want a third term?
Hang on. There's a different thing here, right? He has the ability to run for a third term, right? That's currently not allowed, or it's against precedent, right? I don't know that we should be electing him in 3-4 years. Now, I'm looking at what's playing out, and I'm looking with a lot of caution. If the tariffs do play out and go just as badly as I think JP Morgan and Chase came out with a report the other day saying they're almost certain that we're going to go to a recession this year. Look, that'll be catastrophic if that plays out, and he'll have a lot to answer for that with the tariffs. It was more just that it was a tinkering edge and he exacerbated it. But look, I think he definitely ought to be able to run in the year 2028. But, answering your question, if he was to suspend elections, yes, I would suspend my support for Trump. Maybe some other things, but that's the easiest thing that comes to mind.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that, right? And look, the third term stuff does freak people out, and it worries me, right? What about the Canada stuff?
He's freaked out about an election. Just vote against him. Any election.
We've got a comment here. Not even the Canada 51st state stuff. Like, do you think he's serious? When he was, it seemed at one point that he was threatening to next Canada. Do you think that was ever serious? Or if he actually tried something, would you oppose that?
Hang on, I'm not against Canada potentially joining to be a 51st state, particularly if it's the province of Alberta. Now, again, everything about this is actually kind of important. It's the means of it, right? Now, do I want Ukraine to win? No, I don't want people putting it yes, but I don't want people put into a meat grinder. Do I want net zero? Yes, but I don't want endless subsidies to massive renewable organizations, right? Do I think that Trump could annex Canada? Sure, that'd be good. But if he was to invade Canada,
you think it'd be good?
No, I don't.
Okay,
no, hang on. Sorry. I think it would be great if people democratically voted to join the United States. Of course, why not?
Okay, but you make clear though, if say like the people of Greenland,
if US initiated force, that's bad. That's bad.
Yes. Okay. And we've got a comment by Lenny here, but Canadians don't want to be part of the US as reflected in their recent election. And look,
brilliant. Okay, awesome. Then they shouldn't be a part of the US. But if in 10 years' time they do, because guess what? Things are going to get much worse under Mark Carney. I truly do think that Canada is a place that has voted for more disrepair. That is a country which has gone way by the by. They kind of recognize that they'd like a lot of immigration, but then they went way overboard. In my opinion, at least, and I was someone who traveled there just back end of last year. I do think immigration has in many ways disrupted the social cohesion and the economy of Canada, and also of a country like the United Kingdom too. So, it's
super chat. Thank you, Klungo. Thank you, Klungo, for the super chat. We appreciate it, mate.
This is a great initiative. This StreamYard, fantastic.
No,
look,
it's good fun.
Interesting.
We've done it 32 days in a row. We're going to do it for 100 days in a row. So anybody watching, I'd encourage you to leave a like and subscribe.
Brilliant.
And we are. I'm going to have people on from all different perspectives. I was debating Greens candidate the other day. We haven't even talked about Australia yet, Barclay. Let's talk about Australia.
Of course.
Do you think Trump helped cost the election for the Conservatives in Australia?
I do think it played a big part. And I think the reason why you can actually make that inference is not by looking at the United States, but is actually rather looking at Canada. The immediate decline in Pierre Poilievre's vote, who was broadly even a more popular, he was doing better in the polls than Dutton was. People kept saying, Dutton was leading in the polls. Okay, yeah, but minorly. Pierre Poilievre was eating Trudeau's lunch, right? He's literally part of the reason Trudeau resigned. That was arguably Trump too, right? But I really do think so much of it was linked to Trump. And, more broadly, even if we shift away from Trump for a second, and I was someone who I put my hand up and say, I campaigned for an LNP candidate on Brisbane South Side in Moreton, Henry Swindon. And it really did solidify for me that I really do think Australians are starting to view Australian politics like American politics. Now, what do I mean by that? They're viewing it through the sense of when they're voting, they're not thinking, okay, I'm voting for these list of 8 candidates in the seat of Moreton. I want this one. I want this one. No, they're thinking Albo Dutton, right? And that's a US presidential thinking. And that's because so many people are following US politics. Now, I'm someone who, again, put my hand up. I'm someone who tries to, I don't know if the word is evangelize people to get involved in conservative politics, right? And the number one response I get from people when I try and broach the conversation and say, hey, you follow politics, you interested in politics? And I say, oh, not really. I mostly follow American politics. The amount of times that happens, particularly not on the right, but also people on the left, it's actually staggering. I mean, we all follow. I mean, I remember, Amy Klobuchar in 2020. We all thought it was hilarious. I mean, everything that happens in US politics is hilarious. I remember all the things about the 2020 Democratic primaries was hilarious to me because it happened during COVID. Yeah.
Do you remember how me and my friend we went to the Bloomberg room at UQ and we were pretending we were supporting Bloomberg and stuff like that? I've always loved this stuff.
Super billionaire Mike Bloomberg. No. But no.
Hang on, some super chats. I just want to say thank you so much, Brian W, for the $5 super chat, and also Landy, thank you very much, my friend. I won $30 betting on Labor and Dixon. Here's
no, not good, Andrew, not good. I can't believe you'd back Ailey France, but anyway, that's right. Thank you, Andrew.
Actually, on Dutton, right? Okay. So, did you expect him to lose his seat? And do you think
I did not?
Okay. Do you think why? What's your take? Why do you think he lost his seat of Dixon?
Well, I didn't appreciate how unpopular he was, and I also didn't appreciate how much people vote based off who the leader was. I was in a seat of Moreton, ran a strong local campaign. There was a retiring MP in Graham Perrott in Moreton, and I thought for sure we're not going to win Moreton. It's on a 9% margin, but we're going to get a swing towards us. Henry's been working his backside off, right?
Yeah.
But you go in on the day. I'm trying to sell to people the idea that Henry's a great guy. He's young. He's the youngest guy running. Served us in Afghanistan, right? And
I'm friends with his brother, actually.
Yeah, Charles. Yeah, great guy. But then the trade-off was that, well, not the trade-off. After that, the Labor person would come in and they'd just say the simple words, don't risk Dutton. And it was impossible to run away from because I ran the line of, we're not voting in Dixon, we're voting here in Moreton. But that was a natural flow-on effect that if you did vote for Henry Swindon in the seat of Moreton, you were voting for Peter Dutton. So really, in many ways, yes, I do concede the point that you do have to have likability as a leader. And I didn't realize how much people valued likability. And a historical example, not too historical, but something that I was glad to play a part of. I worked for the LNP on the 2019 election, as a paid employee. And the one thing that we kept on being told was that look at the preferred PM rates, because Scott Morrison lost just about every news poll in that election, the election which Bill Shorten was supposed to be a shoo-in to win. But the one thing that Scott Morrison kept winning, preferred PM. And that almost should become our orthodoxy here. In Australia. Now, as much as the coalition weren't really winning any news polls in the lead up to the election, one thing they're also a mile behind on was the preferred PM. Dutton was nowhere near Albanese there. So it does come down to picking a popular leader. And it's a pretty jading point, but strong local campaigns, I feel, don't count for what they used to anymore. It's all about the leader's appeal. I mean, you look at Max Chandler Mather. If it was all about a strong leader, he should have got 50% of the primary vote. But no, people said, oh, yeah, Albo, this kind of thing, right? Here we go. Con melanitis. What is he saying there?
This is interesting. Let me play devil's advocate on Barclay's point. Adam Bent lost Melbourne because he was a terrible MP who took his seat for granted. I mean, that is still an effect. That's still there.
Well, yeah. Let's not pretend that it doesn't matter. Right. I mean, if I went out there and said to all of my constituents, "Oh, you're all a bunch of losers," yeah, I can expect to lose the seat even if the person who's in my party is a super popular leader. It seems to me that a candidate can definitely.
We've got a comment here. Clem Shorten. That was because of the money Clive put behind trashing Bill reputation. Trust me. Okay. Interesting. Clem Shorten. Thank you.
Yeah. In 2019, that was Clive's big cope, wasn't it? I mean, that was his first election where he put $50 million behind it and then didn't get anyone elected. This is before Babette, by the way. And he says, this is the plan all along. We stopped Shifty Shorten. I don't know how true
that was a massive coat. That was a massive coat.
Yeah, massive coat. Yeah.
Clive Palmer has literally wasted $150 million and gotten one person elected. It's actually insane, to be honest. The amount of money wasted is crazy.
It is, but it's amazing when you're at that level of wealth, you're actually just playing in a different ballpark. So let's say, for instance, he was just trying to save Scott Morrison, and yeah, sure, he directed all his preferences there. He probably didn't win Scott Morrison his narrow 2-seat margin in 2019. He probably stood to gain a lot from having having a government that wasn't going to shut down all resources sectors. So, we say, oh, what a waste of money, Clive, you're such a loser. Okay, but if him spending $50 million on
but
it is maybe a cult, but I'm trying to think, right? I'm trying we don't take everything, we don't just listen to everything. We actually question it. What if he saves $200 million on a minerals deal?
Because I actually say that I actually think Bill Shorten's more moderate than Albo. Because I don't see it as like Albo would have shut. I don't see it as Bill Shorten would have shut down like the mining or whatever. But
no, but Bill is definitely more moderate than Albo. Definitely. No question. Doesn't mean he's more pro-resources than Scott Morrison.
Let me. Apparently, we've got Bill Shorten's daughter here, which is very interesting. We've got a great. Clem, you have to ask Bill to come on the stream sometime. I'd love to have him on. But amazing stuff. What a circus of Australian politics we have here. Even Landy himself.
Wow. So we've got the relatives of the stars of Victorian Labor Party politics in Kimberly Kitchen's husband Andrew Landy, and also the daughter of Bill Shorten. We've got Maribyrnong and also a senator. Yeah.
Oh, I'm still so sad about Kimberly. Like, very
it's
very
awful,
nice
yeah.
made about it. She would have been such a good figure to have in Labor right now to moderate Albo and try and stop him from going down stupid pathways and stuff like that. It's such a sad thing, right? Clem says Bill would come on the stream. If Bill comes on the stream, I'd be very excited, Clem. Thank you very much.
I will say Bill Shorten loves an interview. It feels like every time I turn on my TV, he is there doing an interview.
I love Bill. I met him one time. He was a very nice bloke. He actually said you should come back to the Labor Party. Because you might remember I was actually once in the Labor Party back when I was like 18 years old. I've been in 4 parties by this point. It's pretty funny. Would you accept Bill? Would you accept? He legit would. I always tell him to go on podcasts. Yep, Clem, we've got to get it done. That'd be awesome. That'd be excellent. I've got to ask you, right, Barclay, would you accept that part of the reason why the Conservatives lost was they were perceived potentially as too right-wing? Or do you think, or they were tarred by the right-wing brush of Trump? I've seen some people, I saw Hannah Ferguson, who's like of Cheek Media, and I thought this was ridiculous. She came out and she said, the only way for the Liberals to ever win is if they become fully the Teals. And I thought that's ridiculous. You can't have that. There has to be a Conservative Party in Australian politics. Like, you can't say there's just not going to be a centre-right Australian politics.
Yeah.
If the Liberals want to go, if they go full Teals, then there actually would be the far right, right? The far right would actually come to power if the Liberals were full Teals. That said, though, I've seen Rowan Dean, for example, where Rowan Dean said, oh no, the problem was that Dutton didn't embrace Trump enough. He should have been more right-wing. I think that is probably a bit self-evidently silly considering how unpopular Trump is. So what do you think? What do you think here?
Well, definitely. And I'm going to be very careful with the way I say it because I think this is the wording is very important, right? Yes, the Liberal Party did lose because of the perception that they were too much like Trump. Not because they were too much like Trump, but because of the perception, a perception that was furthered by the Labor Party, a perception that was furthered by the Greens, and even throughout the media. Whenever they would see Jacinda Price, they would ask her, try and trip her up about Trump. Now, I think it is Trump delusion. I think it's, craziness. But yeah, Trump's, unpopularity over in the US definitely did come back to haunt Peter Dutton in the election. Now, this does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that the Liberal Party should somehow be more left-wing. Above all else, I think the Liberal Party need to actually realize what they stand for and not backtrack on things. So, the work from home policy, that's something where, look, if you're going to come out with it, you should at least stick by it. They need to be more bold.
I did read though that was one of the policies that really cost them though. Like, do you think that was a smart policy idea?
Well, no, I actually think the thing that cost them more was the backtracking on it. The amount of people I spoke to who they were like, I actually think the backtracking on it cost them more. It's a thing the Liberal Party seem to be cursed by a lot of the time is that, they're always asked to, they'll have an MP that has like a faux pas or a stuff up. And the media, will email them and say, do you apologize? and they'll apologize, and the apologizing causes the story to prolong even more. Whereas if they just ignore it or they continue going, right, you would actually find that it doesn't stay in the media that much, and it doesn't affect you electorate the ballot box, which is what they care about. I think it's classic, go back to the playground, right? In the bully scenario, you're always told, ignore it, right? The person in the schoolyard who always is the first one to look at anyone's, improper actions in the schoolyard and say, excuse me, miss, Tommy's bullying, or Tommy stole my handball, or Tommy stole my sandwich. They're the one who is likely to then get picked on again because they get a reaction. You give a reaction, you give the bully exactly what they want. We need to just toughen up and play it out, and that's how we'll get rewarded at the ballot box, I think. Be more bold, yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. But would you accept, though, that, there doesn't seem to be an appetite, though, for sort of Trumpism in Australia. And you love Trump. I'd say this election does probably show, it's really quite unpopular in Australia. And where do you go from here if you think it's unpopular?
It is only because of his braggadociousness. Trump-like politics, or policies rather, Doge, maybe don't call it Doge, but the idea that we should audit government and make it more efficient, quite frankly, actually, I don't even care if that's popular or not. That's something 1000% any conservative party or even any centre-right classical liberal party ought do. And there's a certain, point where, if we're told that everything's unpopular and that we should never touch them, I mean, we would have voted yes to the Voice, or the Liberal Party would have had a resounding view that we should all just accept the Voice mantra. This is what CT Group was saying. Crosby Texter was saying to everyone, you need to be in favour of the Voice because otherwise you're going to be electoral kryptonite when you're trying to win the 2025 election. In many ways, that was the only thing going for the Liberal Party at the last election.
But they did. To be honest, though, this is the funny thing, right? They were probably wrong in the sense that, if the Liberals had voted for they were right in the end that the Liberals lost in 2025 and got smashed, but it wasn't because of the Voice, obviously. I guess that's the thing. Yeah.
No, not exactly. And this is the thing. I mean, so much blame. I mean, there's internal navel gazing happening now. So much blame has to go to the polling. I mean, the polling clearly did not stack up. Dutton did not expect to lose his seat. There was polling that I don't think people are very skilled in what they're doing. These pollsters are not really worth the money that we're paying for them, clearly, because there was, missing messages, missing communication. And now you can talk about the narrative, of course, that's been widely talked about, but the polling, which clearly people were lied about. I spoke to a lot of MPs. They thought that the polling was looking a lot better than the national polling. It was actually looking quite a lot worse. And I'm furious because it's now led to, in my home state of Queensland, the loss of good MPs, people like Luke Howarth, who is, I would even call him a mentor, a good friend and a solid conservative. So a lot to answer for. There's going to be a lot of personnel changes that needs to happen. But, the politicians, they need to be and have more guts on the parliamentary wing. And, I just put a public call out there. I think a lot of people ought go ahead and get involved in the LNP. And I pointed to, I hate to get back to it, Tony Abbott was the last strong prime minister we had. He was the last prime minister to have a majority like what Albo's going to have. And boy, oh boy, he ran on a platform of stop the boats. We're not budging. We're not saying, actually, maybe we'll allow some boats in, or maybe we'll just allow boats, but only on Fridays and Saturdays. No, he's going to stop the boats, right? And he was unapologetic, right? Not backtracking, not saying we got that one wrong.
That said, though, it is the case though that, I mean, it is the case that Abbott was really unpopular while he was in office, and which obviously led to the downfall of his government. The other thing I was going to ask, right? I think we've got a comment by Mitchell where he's saying, the sampling bias in polling is awful, especially because it favors urbanites. But I think he's saying it's too lefty, the polling. But dude, the polling underestimated the Labor, if anything, at this election. But what I was going to say, where do you stand on the Liberal leadership? What do you think? I doubt you would have been supporting Susan Lake because she's obviously kind of from the more moderate wing of the party.
For sure, yeah.
What did you think? I mean, who would you have? Did you back Angus Taylor? To be honest, I think I was going to say the only impressive one is actually Hastie, but obviously he sees it as a poison chalice. He's not going to go for it this time.
Yeah, well, if I was Andrew Hastie, I wouldn't have run. And I think he's made the 100% right call. Of course, he's actually, and look, when he's one of the few politicians that come out and says, I do it to spend more time with my family, I actually believe him. I actually genuinely believe that the guy just wants to spend more time with his family and his kids, right? Because they're young, 3 years old. He's still a young guy, right? Have you met him? Good guy. Yeah, really good guy. I don't know if you've met him before, but
I've met him. I met him in London actually, and he actually.
Yeah.
I have respect for Hasty. He actually did back me when the University of Queensland was trying to expel me for the China.
I remember
stuff.
that. I recall that. Yeah.
So
he's a good
I do
guy.
respect him a lot.
Yeah, but on the leadership battle, I was very outspoken in favor of Angus Taylor. Look, I'm very disappointed in the result, obviously, but yeah.
I've obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I personally, I can never see Susan Ley ever being Prime Minister.
I think it'd be quite hard, and I think that's not because of necessarily Susan. I think it's, even before you get to Susan, it's the fact that we're on, 44 seats. I mean, it's going to be hard to win that in 3 years. I also do think that it's not a resounding showing of the party room. I mean, 29 to 25 is not a glowing endorsement, and a couple of those people are actually people who are no longer going to be serving in the parliament to begin with. People like Holly Hughes.
Oh, yeah, they lost their seats.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was the number 4 on the ticket. And the reason why she was so outspoken in favour of Susan Ley, one was because she was not going to serve in the parliament, so she didn't have to deal with it if Angus did win, rather. But second off, the only reason she did that was because she was dealt against by the factional power plays in the New South Wales Liberal Party, which is a basket case, and she was shafted to number 4 on the Senate ticket in favour of Jess Collins. So, that's the reason why she had a personal axe to grind against Angus. And a lot of people look at her comments and say, well, she's not of the political right or of the moderates. And as a result, we all listen to her as an unbiased centrist. No. Holly is someone who is very outspoken. She's always been outspoken. In many ways, I've actually liked Holly. In many ways, she's outspoken on a number of issues. But this is something that someone that just had an axe to grind with Angus Taylor. And that was the main dilemma there. So, it was quite disappointing. And I think that, everything rebuilds. And a lot of people saying, I think it's hilarious, the hubris from a lot of people on the minor right of politics saying, the Liberal Party is dead, the Liberal Party is dead. Okay, with what alternative? What replacement? Who's coming up to fill that void? Now, the Liberal Party, I do believe, sadly, is most likely to be in opposition for 6 years at a minimum, right? But I do really – there is no reform. There is no reform party that's coming out of the ether to come and eat the Liberal Party and the coalition's lunch. It is not happening. And I think that a lot of people –
I'm interested. If that happened in Australia, would you support it?
Well, no, I mean, it's a hypothetical, right? It's a hypothetical of, well, it depends. If it was the case that the Liberal Party totally strayed from every value they ever purported to write on that we believe statement, and if all the good people left the Liberal Party, I mean, it'd be pretty hard to stay. But what if this reform alternative ends up being a more, protectionist kind of outlook on life, or it ends up being more of a identitarian kind of movement? Oh, that's something I'd probably oppose because, call me a cringe neoliberal. Okay, cool, bro. Yeah, I'm a cringe neoliberal, right? Studied economics. That's just kind of my outlook on life. And I view things first and foremost through an economic lens. And, something must be said for the fact that a lot of the pain that we're enduring is because of a lot of the pain that was, or a lot of the monetary quantitative easing that was put out through the 2021-2022 period through Josh Frydenberg, a Liberal treasurer, and that was so disappointing. And that's why it feels like the Liberal Party do not have a brand anymore, because we say that we're the better economic managers, and we kind of have to scratch our heads and think, oh my goodness, really? It was us who did that. Now, let's be clear. Labor would have gone infinitely more, because at every time when Josh Frydenberg would hand out things for JobKeeper, things for JobSeeker, the Labor Party said, no, you're not doing enough, right? So they are still better, but it's a hard narrative to sell, because, the pain we are feeling now is because of the handouts we gave during the COVID period. And, National Cabinet, what a mistake that was.
Can I pull you up on that, though? Do you think it's actually really the case that the pain in the Australian economy really comes back to quantitative easing? Because I think it dates back a lot longer. Like, I think the problem with sort of like the asset price bubble that we've got in Australia, that's probably going back all the way to Howard, right?
Yeah, well, I think look at inflation. That's definitely due to quantitative easing. I think that the reason why people can't afford a home is definitely not, necessarily linked to QE. It's more a case of things like immigration. I think that's one thing that I had to pat Peter Dutton on the back for, because Scott Morrison and Turnbull would never make that connection for fear of alienating migrant communities. But Dutton called a spade and said, no, we actually need to realise, and Tony Abbott's come out with an op-ed this week, addressing this as well, that it is leading to high housing prices. So.
That said, though, I mean, he only really recommend. Look, there's two parts to this, right? One is he only recommended a 100K cut. The second part is when the biggest, probably the biggest factor in the massive numbers that we've seen in recent years is the international student thing, right? And to their credit, Labor did try to put a cap on international students, right? And Liberals under Dutton teamed up with the Greens to block that because of like the power of the university lobby. So I do want to say, I mean, if that's part of it, right? I think those are some pretty out there stances for Dutton to take.
I'm interested. I'll come out there and say I disagree with that. I don't think that we should be. Yeah. I think there is a bit of a scam going on with international student visas, and I think that it's something that 100% needs to be curtailed. And I do think part of it is why a lot of people aren't graduating university degrees and why they're dropping out at high rates, because there used to be some kind of a culture at university because there was homogeneity of culture, and I think Stephen Shipper was on the podcast before that, whilst multi-ethnicism, has a lot of merits, right? Multiculturalism should actually be brought under far greater scrutiny. That sometimes homogeneity in culture, what do we mean by that? We mean respect for democracy, respect for women, respect for civil debate, fair criticism of our leaders. These are things that are actually foreign to a lot of cultures. So no, I don't believe in multiculturalism if it means that we import some of the worst parts from other cultures. And that's something that Tony Abbott spoke about in his op-ed too. So, and that's part of the reason why I truly believe that people go to the university and they don't feel like they have a university experience anymore. And as a result, they're dropping out. Now, I think part of it is good because we need more people in trades and there are large skill shortages. And they need to be made up, particularly if we're not going to import skilled labor. So I think, in many ways, it's good that we can put people out of the university system. But, we want people to go to university and have an enjoyable experience. I mean, Drew, let's tread a fine line here. But you've been a part of the student elections process at UQ. And sure, it's a massive time suck. But now it has become dominated by a group called Global Mates. And it doesn't feel like...
Oh, that is really bad. No, that's really bad.
Yeah. And I actually do think...
Let me say that, right? What's happening there? I'll explain to people, right? Like, where student university elections used to be, I guess, like Labor versus Liberal. Now, I guess, like the smarter hacks in both parties have worked out that they can basically sort of create these international student parties, and they can just vote in like massive numbers. And it's pretty interesting because, like, a lot of the time, like they'll be driving people to campus. Like you wonder to what extent it's an actual grassroots thing and how much of it is kind of astroturfed a bit. And look, at the University of Sydney, it had a really bad impact at the University of Sydney where University of Sydney had Panda. It was very infamous. It was literally a student union grouping that was pro-CCP. They was straight up pro-CCP. And when the Hong Kong protests happened, they were explicitly anti-Hong Kong. So, I mean, that is a part of it. I was going to say, Barclay, like, I think the problem is when multiculturalism becomes sectarianism. Because I think the biggest problem is that there's not actually, cultural exchange and sort of assimilation and integration, stuff like that, and cultural fusion. I think, unfortunately, when you have numbers that are huge, there's very little integration. There's very little cultural exchange. And so, for example, at the University of Queensland, I think anybody really would say this, like, and this is actually kind of sad thing. The Chinese students often keep to themselves, and there's not much cultural interaction, and there's not much. It's a sad thing. Like, it would be better if it was more integrated. And part of that actually is as well, like the Chinese consulate literally runs the Chinese student associations, and they literally, they put people in charge of these student associations to make sure nobody is doing anything that would be democratic or anti. So look, this is a long-term problem, I think, in Australian politics, where we are seeing rising sectarianism and leads to a sense of cultural dislocation and alienation. And I think this is what's happening in Britain right now. And honestly, I actually really think that Keir Starmer is on the right path when he's come out and said, look, we face the reality that Britain is becoming a nation of strangers, and we don't want that. It's not Labor values to have a system where people are alienated and isolated and alone. And it's even bad for the migrants themselves as well, because a lot of them don't even have the opportunity to properly integrate. So
right, but I don't know. We can't look at Keir Starmer's words with authenticity. I mean, this is a guy who is seeing that reform is literally swept the council elections, and he scratches his head and thinks, "Wow, I need to start appealing to this demographic, or I'm going to start losing." And he's really just buckling to pressure. So I don't know that we tip our hat to Keir Starmer. I think that in many ways he's presided over it.
I want to ask you, when it comes to British politics, are you full Reform and Nigel Farage, or are you still with the Tories? Because the Tories are seeming like they're on their deathbed in Britain.
Yeah, it actually does seem remarkable over there, and it's remarkable because it's not even through a preferential voting system. They're somehow managing to win these elections based off first past the post. I'm a huge supporter of reform. I'm skeptical of the party mechanics, and I know that between now and the next federal election over there, that there will be every single knife coming out from the Tory old guard. Everyone trying to do something that disrupts reform as they try and desperately cling on to the two-party dynamic. I do think some elements of reform maybe do straddle the line a little bit too radically, I suppose. Mostly on things like trade. They're very pro-protectionism, which I don't necessarily agree with. I spoke about that before. I don't think tariffs are good for the economy. But I do think that, generally, if we're talking about immigration, 1,000%, they've reoriented the discussion. Now, I will say I heard Kemi Badenoch speak. I thought she spoke really well. I don't know that, in the same vein as Susan Ley, I think it's hard to get someone to rally behind a figure like that. I don't know. But it will be interesting. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. I know the next election, they have 5-year terms. It's crazy over there. So, what was that?
Yeah, 5-year terms is actually, honestly, 5-year terms are too long, I actually think. It's funny. I think 3 is too short. And I think 3 is too short in Australia. And I think 5 is too long. Maybe 4 is like literally the right way to go.
Yeah, it will be interesting, though, because there genuinely is wasted votes over there, right? Now, it is indeed the case that you don't waste a vote here in Australia. Like, someone can comfortably, it's not true to say that a vote for the Greens is a vote for the LNP because you're not giving it to Labor, right? You can just put Labor too, right? Same as on the other side, it's not true that if you're voting for One Nation, it's a vote for Labor, right? If you preference the LNP second, well, then guess what? It's a vote for the LNP. You control your preferences, right? Now, not publicly encouraging people to vote any certain way, right? But one thing I will say is that, over there, they're going to split the vote. It'll be a classic case of, it'll actually take me back. I think it was maybe in the 1920s, Drew, in Australia, where there was a famous contest where it was the Liberals got 30%, the Nationals got 30%, and the Labor Party got 40%. And it basically made the Liberal and National parties realize, stuff it. We're actually... we could easily dominate the Labor Party here on a vote of 60-40. We just need to we need to have preferences, because if we had preferences instead of first past the post, we'd win. There's a famous state election.
It's funny that it came from the Conservatives.
Yeah, so funny, because now I would be the one who'd be more sympathetic to that. One thing we definitely need to get rid of, which is corrosive, is compulsory preferential voting. I think that would allow for so much more. 100%. Yeah, no, definitely, because. You think if you truly want to make the LNP more conservative, for instance, or you want to make the Labor Party more left-wing, bad luck, right? As long as they are to a millimetre to the left, in the case of the Labor Party, or a millimetre to the right of the, like in the LNP's case, of the Labor Party, that you're essentially they know that you're going to give your preference back to them. Let's say you're a pro-life advocate, right? And I've spoken to many, and you say, the LNP aren't pro-life enough. I'm going to put all my support behind Family First, LNP, Family First, One Nation, all these other parties. But of course, they're still going to put LNP above Labor, which is all that matters in most seats. So, whereas, in some instances, if you had optional preferential voting, you would allow for people who do want to punish Conservative parties for not being outspokenly conservative enough. You can say, well, I'm going to vote one for
it encourages extremism, though. It does encourage extremism, though.
We'll call it extremism. I call it more values, right? You can't look at the last election and tell me that we don't need more values being espoused by the political candidates, and that is a byproduct of compulsory voting and compulsory preferential voting. Drew, you're not going to have like the US. Trust me, you will not have it descend into that way. The Australian demographic is not as polarized as the US demographic.
What I was going to say is like I do actually think it's annoying how hard it is to get ahead in Australian politics if you're a free thinker, right? So like, for example, like I just don't fit in any bracket really, and I think I want to one day be involved in politics, but I actually just can't see any potential where like you get pre-selected by a party, because it's just impossible, right? So I think it is actually a bit frustrating how the party machines do basically pre-select for the hacks, the really safe candidates, and you never get anyone interesting. That said, though, I wouldn't want it to be fully America, though, because it does seem like America is basically teetering on the brink of civil war every fucking 20 years. Like I don't know. Do you get what I mean?
I do get what you mean, and I do share those concerns. I think that's a byproduct of the presidential model, and I do think it's something that's happened uniquely. It's mostly been exacerbated in the Trump era because, I'm going to put it out there. He is divisive, okay, right? I don't necessarily think divisive as a whole term necessarily means someone's bad. You can have a divisive viewpoint on a topic, but guess what? You're right, okay? And a lot of those topics, Trump tends to be right? Whether it's divisive or not, well, okay, it's the right thing. I do think a lot of what we're pointing to is not a problem of, compulsory voting and, compulsory preferential voting. It's actually a problem of the presidential model, which, polarizes people a lot more, and also the Trump effect. I think you'd find that we would have far more better discussion and bolder discussion of ideas in Australia if we did have optional voting. I think that'd be one of the biggest reforms that I could do if I was in office for one day,
Let me ask you this, right? What do you think? What do you think is really behind these big polarization stuff in America?
I do think a huge part of it is the media. I do think there is a lot of funding of elections over there, which look, they're the center of the universe, right? So there's a lot of eyes watching it. There's a lot of people funding content. You got a lot of people.
Actually, let me ask you this, right? Let me ask you this. Obviously, you're like really interested. We're both the same, right? We're both really interested in politics, in American politics. While you were over there, did you ever think about potentially wanting to stay there long term? Did you feel?
Great question. Yeah. I decided prior to going over there that in the long run, I did want to, come back home and live in Australia. And that's right, because I've got a really good community here. I've got a really good group of people that, I've been going to church recently. I've been, going to, things like that. And a really good community of people that I would call friends, and long term, I want to live my life here. Over there, you really do feel like a small fish in a huge pond. Whereas if you're involved in politics in Australia, because of how few, I'll just finish this, because of how few people are involved here, you do begin to feel like, okay, I can actually have a say in my community. I can impact outcomes. So I went over there knowing full well I was not going to stay, and I actually think that meant I had a bloody good time, because so many people go over there with this kind of like, oh, is the grass greener on the other side? Do I need to start thinking about networking? Do I need to start thinking about getting a longer term job? Do I need to start thinking about finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? All these kind of things that people start thinking about, and it actually paralyzes them and they don't enjoy the time. But I was over there having the time of my life. Yeah. What are you going to say?
What do you think are the biggest cultural divides between Australia and America? Like what was the sort of cultural thing that you actually didn't really like in America out of it?
Yeah,
what were the things that you didn't dislike most?
Gee, it's been a while since I did economics, but the Gini coefficient was very visible over there. So what do I mean by that?
Oh, you mean the inequality?
The inequality, right? Yeah. So
actually, this is a good question. As a libertarian, do you endorse the Australian universal public healthcare model?
No, I don't. And I actually do think the reason why public healthcare is so expensive in the US is because in many ways we're actually funding a lot of the public healthcare, and the things like the PBS, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme in Australia, is being funded by US healthcare companies, which wouldn't actually be able to do a lot of the research that they did on the Pfizer vaccine, all these mRNA technologies, all these kind of research that they do, all these massive companies, whether you agree with the research or not, right? But they wouldn't be able to do them if they didn't have a for-profit model operating in the US, because in every other country, they're just subsidized out the wazoo. And, so in many ways, the US, people say, oh, it's the bane of the world. Okay, yeah, bro, they're subsidizing your PBS. They are subsidizing the reason why you are able to access American-made drugs in your country, right? That's what's happening. And guess what? There's going to be a reorientation here happening now, whereby Trump is actually going to start thinking, well, hang on, why are we subsidizing the world's PBS programs? Trump posted the other day, right? This is actually something that needs to be discussed, that in many ways, other countries have been leeching off America. And that's the reason why, it is so hypocritical for us to look at the US and say, oh, wow, all those rich, greedy drug companies in the US, they're jacking up the prices, right? They're ripping off.
Landy has a good point here. I mean, Trump the other day did actually kind of talk about price controls with some of the big pharma companies, right? I mean, that was something.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to, right? It's a good sentiment, but I'm not in favor of price controls, right? So I think that there's a better way to go about it. I think that, often a lot of the things that are being prevented in alternative medicines are things that are blocked by the FDA that create pseudo monopolies for a lot of remedies. There are a lot of things that are prevented from being tested. They institute in some places, areas where you can't test on animals. I think that you ought to be able to test on animals as opposed to humans, right? And they disapprove of certain drugs being put on, on the market. So it's absolutely absurd. But I wanted to go back to the point on inequality because that's what I brought up. Now, a lot of people think when you mean inequality, they think you mean your median earnings, right, or people on the street. Yeah. It's actually across a lot of things. Take weight and take intelligence, right? The common misnomer we often hear is that Americans are fatter and that they're dumber, right? Now, on the extremes, boy, oh boy, there's a lot of fat people in America, right? And there are a lot of dumb people in America. But it's the Gini coefficient. Instead of everyone being concentrated into the top of the curve, it's more flattened out, right? That's what you're seeing in Australia because, you go to a public school in Australia, sure, there's public schools and private schools that are, some are really ritzy, some are really, not great public schools, right? But, generally you're all getting an education. That's a product of having a nationalized education curriculum, right? Whereas over in the US, even sometimes, a couple suburbs away, you've got preparatory schools, which I was fortunate enough to go to for a year in grade 11. Boy, oh boy, it's like $30,000 a year to go to, crazy.
Wait, you actually,
I'm saying this so I didn't have to pay for it, thankfully. I got a scholarship over there. But, you got $30,000 a year. And
you spent a year in America as in high school.
Yes, yeah, I did. Yeah, a year in America in grade 11. I did speech and debate in Florida. Funnily enough, I debated on the same circuit as David Hogg. I don't know if you know David Hogg at all.
Oh, really?
Yes. No, interesting guy. But obviously he's made a bit of a career for himself now. But yeah, no, there is a lot more people on the extremes. There are a lot of people in the US who are far more intelligent. They know a lot about my country even more than I did. Now, this was a byproduct of me being in DC. A lot of intelligent people. But on the fitness thing, right? This fitness weight thing, right? The misnomer is we have a lot of Americans are fat. Well, newsflash, a lot of Australians are fat. We're actually not that different. Now, there are some supersized Americans, which is the ones that we get broadcast to. But at the same time, there are a lot of people over there, far more, to a far greater degree than Australia, that actually do have starvation issues in certain areas. There is a very small portion of the Australian public who genuinely are starving, and it's showing on their malnutrition body. But there is a portion of the America where that is actually the case, right? Solutions to that we can debate, of course. But yeah, no, look, I think it was very interesting. Great. Great.
That's interesting.
There, but yeah.
I was going to say, Barclay, I went to DC once for like 2 days, and I actually kind of understand what you're saying because it's funny. I feel like the average American wouldn't know much about Australian politics at all, but some of the people you talk to in DC, like, will literally have like encyclopedic knowledge, and you're like, holy shit! And like, they are actual, real experts and professionals, right? So it's interesting. It's very funny how that works.
Yeah.
Good
point. Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting though. I mean, like the inequality thing. I mean, what do you think that comes down to though? I mean, obviously America has a much more kind of like rugged individualistic style of government, and they have much less of a social safety welfare net. I mean, obviously you're a libertarian. I assume you're sort of against the welfare net. Do you think there are some ways where the Australian safety net is actually better? Than the American system, or
I actually do think we're in a bit of a bubble here, and I hate to go back to immigration, but I think a lot of the hardship that Australians would otherwise face is being masqueraded by immigration so far. And an economy propped up by immigration. You look at something like birth rates, for instance, which is actually probably my number one issue when I talk about politics to anyone. Birth rates is one of the number one issues in any country, and we're at a current birth rate of 1.5, right? That means that you're below replacement by a huge degree. People think 1.5 is not far from 2.1. No, bro, it's a long way, right? That means every business, if we have no immigration, and some countries have no immigration, right? It would be a population decline. The US is higher on that metric, and they actually don't need immigration to prop up their economy to masquerade the wounds that they're going through. Now, I do think that a lot of the issues that you see in a lot of American countries is actually a lot of it's prevalent in Democratic-run areas where there are huge government safety nets. Let's not pretend that the US is this bastion of individualism. It's actually a union of states. States with
true.
You go to certain places in the US, you will find that like, wow, how am I in the same country as here as opposed to another place?
Yeah, it's
so you can tell maybe they need more, concentration in the federal government. And I would say, no, you got to take the good with the bad when it comes to having a union of states and competitive federalism. And I think that it's a beautiful model. You can't point to the worst of it and say that, that's the embodiment. It's a brilliant model. And there's no reason why the US had to be the hegemony of the world, which is its now pseudo decision or pseudo position. This has not been something that's, happened since the days of Jesus Christ or since, the dawn of time. This has only been a recent phenomenon. The US, in the scheme of time, has only been around for 250 years, and it has become the behemoth, the hegemon of the world, outspending all of its, military, neighbors, and it's not even the biggest country, right, in terms of population or landmass. So it's a phenomenon. It should be studied. You can't just point to certain inequalities and say that that's the reason why we need to do away with the American system that has brought so much prosperity. Competitive federalism is brilliant, and that's why I think national cabinet was the biggest mistake during COVID, not to go back to it, but yeah.
I want to quickly just respond to Landy here. 100% agree with Barclay. Our fertility rate is the single biggest challenge facing Australia. That's why we need immigration. We're very lucky people want to come here. I mean, it is true. And look, I want to clarify for Landy. I do obviously support like migration to Australia. It's just, I think the current numbers where it's like about 500K net a year, I just think it's unsustainable for the country in terms of housing, infrastructure. And I think because the problem is, I think,
but Drew, go a step further. Social cohesion too.
That's what I was going to say. That I was going to say.
100%. I was going to say that. It's happening. Yeah.
So I was going to say, like, this is unfortunately something I really only kind of woke up to after October 7. Like the way that there were some really like fire bombings of Jewish synagogues in Australia and stuff like that, and it was radical. It was radical extremists from, it was radical Islamist extremists, etc. Like, it's very confronting to realize like that's a problem that actually exists in Australia, that there are some people who have radical extremist beliefs and don't agree with, the very basic core principles of Australia and will go out there and literally, firebomb places. Like I took a long time for me to work that out. And, for me, when I saw what happened at that Sydney hospital where you had those two nurses, the jihadi nurses who said that they would kill a Jewish patient if one came to them, and they were literally in their scrubs at the hospital filming themselves. I saw that and I was like, that's kind of like a Chernobyl moment for multiculturalism. Like, you can't look at that and be like, it's working really well right now. Because I remember, there's a thing that a lot of Australian politicians will say. They'll say like, we're the most successful multicultural country in the world. But I think like when we got examples of like, there were mosques, for example, in Western Sydney that literally held memorial services for Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. And this is a terrorist organization, a listed terrorist organization. So this is something that's really difficult. And I think we just have to get so much better at vetting people. And I think, and Lendu points out that not all the jihadists are born overseas either. I think we also have to have the conversation of, like, if somebody is literally going overseas and joining ISIS, I don't think it actually... Look, I've got a very tough hardline position on this. Remember a couple of years back, there was a big debate in the Liberal Party. Abbott wanted to strip ISIS fighters of their citizenship. And George Brandis was like, no, on civil libertarian grounds, we can never do that. But like, I've actually certainly come around to the Abbott position on that, where I'm like, if you join ISIS, like, you've just so obviously abrogated any tie you have to Australia. Like, you're literally joining a group that's like hostile to the very concept of Australia's existence. You're literally at war with Australia at the point that you join ISIS. Like, I can't see how you can still have citizenship in that scenario, even if you're born in Australia. I don't know. That's
big time. I agree with that.
And
I don't think you can just go to the extreme examples of people.
Although Lendu does have a point. Like, Lendu does say that he agrees on that one, and yeah, true. But
but what I'm saying is, you can't just go to the extreme examples and pretend that assimilation only started after October 7, and that
No, you're right. I agree with you there.
I think that the very fact that I was in Moreton, a very, very multicultural area, and I was fully prepared for that. But what I wasn't prepared for was me standing at a polling booth saying, this is Henry Swindon. He's a guy who wants to ease cost of living pressures. He wants to make it easier for people to get in the housing market. Sure, call it political spin. Sure, right? But these were issues that weren't, these people weren't fazed by. These people were coming up to me and they would say, okay, but what's his stance on Israel-Palestine? And I almost felt like
that is really bad.
I almost felt like going up to them and saying, he doesn't care about it. That's actually not on his agenda. That's not his issues, right? That is staggering. And I don't view that as, everyone's different. I view that as hang on, this is someone who is not in touch with Australians, not in touch with Australian culture, or wants to care about Australian issues. This is someone who, physically they're here, but mentally and, spiritually and emotionally, they're in another country. They're not vowing the Australian spirit, the Australian flag. How did this happen?
I really dislike that sectarianism. I completely know what you're talking about. And you know what's funny? I thought that given the massive Greens campaign out there, I thought they would get a bigger swing towards them. I thought that she might even have a chance of winning that one. That's one. It was actually crazy that they only got a 1% swing to them. But it is really confronting when you have people going to the votes saying, I think it's really confronting when you have people going to the election and they're saying, my number one only issue is Palestine. That's sectarianism. That is sectarianism. Yeah. And I just think that's not good for the country. This is also a problem that we have to try and talk about long term. I mean, I know for this is it's interesting, Barclay. I know maybe we can probably start wrapping it up maybe like 10 minutes or something like that, because it is 2 hours. Yep. But this is an interesting thing to discuss. So, obviously 2022, one of the key takeaways that the Liberal Party had was that they had been too anti-China and therefore had lost in seats where there were large concentrations of Chinese Australians, and therefore they had to moderate their stance on China. And you saw that with Peter Dutton coming out and he was saying that he actually was pro-China. He wanted to have a good relationship with China, all that sort of stuff. And I mean, you can have that debate. I remember this is something. Jane Hume came out a couple of days before the election and she said something that was genuinely really stupid. And I thought it was really annoying because I think what happened was she was just talking to somebody, Labor. I think she was talking to a Labor candidate, Tanya Plibersek, on TV. And she just randomly said out of nowhere with no evidence, oh, you've got CCP spies campaigning for you. That was clearly stupid. And I think it's a stupid moment because it means you can't actually have a serious conversation about the CCP in this country, because it then the whole debate becomes typecast as you're attacking people based on race and all that stuff. And what happened was, I'm not sure if you've read the analysis, but there were a lot of people who said, based on that one comment, there was a massive swing at the last moment against the Liberal candidates in a couple seats, for example, Reid, Chisholm, Bennelong. Labor might still have won those seats, but there was an extra swing on top of that, right? And
in my opinion, I think.
I'm worried. I'm worried that I see this trend long term where it's I feel like Australian foreign policy, there's a couple seats, there's 10 seats where, there might be a large Islamic Australian population, there might be a large Chinese Australian population. And it seems that core features of Australian foreign policy is almost being held hostage to some of these seats. That's what I'm concerned about long term, right? And I don't know how to deal with that as a country. It's really hard.
Well, in my opinion, talk about Jane Hume's comments, right? I think that what is happening is that we actually forget when we're in a political bubble how many people actually watch the news, how many people actually listen to political talk shows, have heard of Jane Hume, right? The people have not heard of these people, right?
No. What happened though? It was. Sorry. One quick section. I read in the news what happened was they took that clip and they circulated it on WeChat. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. No one knows who Jane Hume is. The average Australian doesn't know who Jane Hume is. The average Australian isn't watching the news. But they take that clip, it goes on WeChat, and to be honest, obviously I'm as anti-CCP as it comes. I still think it was a stupid comment. But what I'm concerned about long term is if the Australian if both major parties start to think we have to moderate our stance on China because we might lose these seats. I'm really worried about that, right? And it's hard. That is sectarianism.
Just to draw an analogy, let's not kid ourselves that what you and I saw happen at a UQ union level is happening on a macro level in Australia. I truly do believe that. They are going through and mobilizing the WeChat people now that you've got a party like Global Mates. In this case, they're all funneling in behind the Labor Party, utilizing groups like WeChat, and they're just getting better at it. So these swings that you're seeing are actually just the Labor Party getting better at really just blindly mobilizing Chinese people. Yeah.
Can I moderate that, Barclay? We're talking about Australian citizens here, right? And it's not that they're. What I want to say, right, is I think the problem is that obviously WeChat at the end of the day is a platform that is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and there is not really any. There's very all the apps that unfortunately are popular with Chinese-speaking Australians are ultimately apps that are basically controlled out of mainland China. And I think probably a big part of it, right, is we need to try and invest in like ABC Chinese. We have to, I don't know, part of it as well. Because I want to just moderate what you were saying. I think you were saying you were talking about it as if it's like branch stacking, and I don't think it's branch stacking necessarily that we're talking about. What I'm talking about is like, I think it's a media bubble where, you know, there are these apps that are ultimately controlled by mainland China, and they will ultimately, like, they can decide what gets censored on these apps, what is allowed on these apps. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I saw it firsthand. I mean, the reason why I campaigned in Morton in one of the most diverse electorates is because, you know, I speak Chinese. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm on the same level as a lot of the people who are, you know, handing out for.
You actually do speak Chinese, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You know, there's a lot of people who, you know, are going to outdo me, you know, and don't have the full vernacular, or they have, you know, cultural idioms that they can use to, you know, put people on their side. And of course, they have the Chinese identity. But, you know, look, and you go back to the point, you know, before, it's like, it's a question of how do we get into this mess? You know, it's actually kind of a bit of a black-pilled kind of view of like, well, you know, I'm not looking at, okay, how do we appeal to the new Chinese demographic? It's like, wow, how do we get to this level? How do we get to the level where I'm at a booth in Australia and I'm being asked not about cost of living, not about grocery prices, not about, you know, how do I get into the housing market, not about national defense, but about Israel, Palestine? You just think, wow, this is remarkable. And now I will say,
it's not,
you know,
it's
I think that
sectarianism.
if you talk about sectarianism, there is less sectarianism from a Chinese perspective. You know, not
No, I
many
agree
of them
with you
are,
there.
very few of them are coming up to me saying, what is your stance on Taiwan? Right. You know, that's not happening.
No, I do want to actually, can I say, Barclay? And again, this is coming from someone who's like the biggest anti-CCP critic ever. I actually want to say, like, vast majority of Chinese Australians, I think, are like not sectarian in that way at all. I personally do think that, right? Based on my own interaction, it does unfortunately seem to be particularly a problem when it comes to like Islamist political ideology, right?
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. And I don't know how we solve it, but one thing's for certain: we need a reconsidered thought about immigration, and one that doesn't, you know, doesn't fear being called racist. I mean, what is it going to be, the millionth and third time that I get called racist, that I go into a corner and cry? No, you don't want to obscure the discussion. It's not racism. Just say that we need a measured immigration program.
I think a big part of it, though, is also not even just immigration, but also a big part of it is we don't actually define Australian values at all, almost. I feel like there's too much cultural relativism, and it's like right. I feel like there is like this widespread kind of thinking, and I think it's a really erroneous thought, but I think a lot of people unfortunately see it this way, where they're like, to say that certain cultural beliefs or attitudes are bad is racist. And it's like, no, like we need to articulate, like, you know, these are the values. This is what it's not just mateship. Because I think the problem is, like, we ask people go, oh, you know, what's Australian values? And then we just hear the politician go, oh, you know, mateship, fair go. And it's like, that's not properly articulated, right? Like that doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. Like,
and I think in many ways we are kind of paralyzed by this, you know, this, I don't want to say it's an incursion, because, you know, they were here first, of course, but we do have this kind of guilt about, you know, celebrating Australian culture, because we think, oh, well, actually, are we, you know, truly Indigenous? And, you know, I'm up here saying these are true blue Australian values, but am I really the right one to be saying it? You know, should I be using the more traditional word for Brisbane, Meandrin? You know, is that a traditional? Yeah, so we're kind of paralyzed in many ways, that we can't be unashamed and proud that when we have, you know, a day of celebration, you go to US 4th of July, it is universal celebration. Now, understand that celebrates independence. It does not celebrate, you know, colonization. But, you know, there is no day. There's no day where it feels like people are really rallying behind one common culture, and that's because cultural relativism. And that was one thing that, you know, if we go back right to the start of the video, what did I eventually get in trouble? What did I, you know, first get in trouble for? Was for platforming a comment which basically came to the conclusion that certain cultures were not better than others, and that's a standpoint that I've never taken a step back from. I've never apologized about. Some cultures are better than others.
Can I say that, like, that particular comment about the wheel thing? Like, look, that's not really. I know
what you're about to say. It is not, and I've clarified with it. And now I know, you know, people say things when they're drunk, right? But it's not a comment about intellect. It's not a comment about skull sizes or that path, right? It's a simple comment. And if you actually look at the preface of it, it was talking in the context of standing for our national flag, right? That's what it was talking about. It was talking about Australian national flag and national anthem. And it was saying, well, hang on, you know, there's certain merits to culture. Let's not pretend, you know, as we are often told in schools, you know, particularly nowadays, that going back to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, right, would actually be so, you know, like beneficial to us all. That's not true.
I do want to say
life expectancy. That's what we have. Indigenous life expectancy is the greatest today that it's ever been, right? We don't talk about that because we can't celebrate Western culture.
Look. There still is obviously the big life expectancy gaps that do exist today, and I do want to say, like, part of it. I do want to say, right, like when I talk about cultural beliefs and values and stuff like that, I'm really talking more about abstract stuff in terms of, like, you know, beliefs in equality and, you know, those sorts of things, rather than sort of material goods. Because, like, obviously, like, I don't say that a hunter-gatherer lifestyle is like the greatest thing ever. And obviously there are some woo-woo people out there who kind of think, like, you know, you do get comments where people are like, you know, back then we were all in tune with, like, nature. If only we could go back. Like I think that's a bit silly. Like, obviously, like I'm happy to live in the modern world. I want to say that, like, it is probably, I think, rough. I do think that the wheel comment was rough in the sense that, like, you know, there were different conditions in Australia in the sense that, like, you know, there was not sedentary patterns of living and stuff like that. So, you know, there was less. That we also didn't necessarily have domestic animals in the sense, like, we didn't have cattle, we didn't have horse and stuff like that. So it's harder for them. You know, it's harder, I guess, just given the geographic and the historical context. Like, I think it's a bit too simplistic to just be like the wheel. So I do want to say that, right? But I do think overall the problem is kind of cultural relativism. And look, there's a good comment where someone says this. He goes, it's not Asians' fault that white Australians hate their own Australian culture and think it's illegal in some country. And I think we should actually say this, right? Like, I think the reality is, if we're talking about it fairly, I think the majority of this is coming mostly from young white Australians, like
100%.
The guilt complex.
I've said that before, right? It's the education system that is causing it. I mean, the amount of times that we would have to refer to, you know, Indigenous texts in school, and it was like, you know, there's a certain level of understanding and respect for a culture that's gone by, and then there's wow, this is a culture that we all ought to aspire to, and undermine what we currently have, and throw out things like Shakespeare, throw out things like the Magna Carta to listen to, you know, an ego, right? And Dreamtime stories. You know, it's actually,
I want to say, Barclay, I do want to say, like, I do think that there's value in Indigenous culture. I still think it's nice to learn about it and, like, you know, to say, you know, this is part of the Australian story. But I guess, but if the question is, like, should like the sort of European heritage of Australia, like, be, I guess, like, denigrated, because I think that's where it comes in, right? But yeah,
I think so, and I think it. You know, there's metrics to anything, right? Like, I mean, I think we've very much overdone it. And look, this has been a great discussion, but hey, we've probably got to stop before we overdo it, right?
Yeah. Look, it was good discussion, Barclay. Good discussion. We obviously had
so much, mate.
Yeah. It was good. Like, look, we had disagreements on Ukraine. We had some disagreements on, like, you know, Australian history and stuff. But we were able to talk about it in a very logical way. And look, it's very interesting. And we actually had a lot. I think this was my second biggest ever live stream. We had almost.
What was the biggest?
Look at it now. Biggest was Australian election night. We got 90 live viewers at one point, and I think we averaged about 55. I think this is my second best. We averaged 47 live viewers for most of it. So
brilliant, awesome.
Yeah, honestly,
I'm glad I can help that out.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, good on you, man.
Yeah, no, of course. And I'm
more
sure
discussions
we'll do this
need
again,
to be
man.
had. Yep.
Yeah,
of course.
absolutely. Thank you, Barclay. Have a good one, mate. Have a good one.
Legend. Thank you, guys. Thanks, viewers.
See you, mate. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I'll probably stay for like 5 more minutes. Does anybody have any, like, comments or? Oh, hang on, Barclay. Yeah, all good. See you, mate. Guys, I'll stay for 5 more minutes. If anybody has any, like, other comments or questions you want to quickly run by me, I'm happy to stay for 5 more minutes, sort of thing, answer questions and stuff like that. I do want to say, like, I don't necessarily agree with the exact way that Barclay was framing that commentary at the end about Indigenous history, because, like, look, I still think, like, you know, there's nice parts. It's nice to be culturally respectful. It's nice to learn about different cultures and stuff like that. My only problem is when it's kind of saying that other Australians have a lesser claim to Australia than Indigenous Australians, because I think we all should be able to have a claim to this country, right? I think we shouldn't get into blood and soil arguments, whether it's Aboriginal blood and soil arguments or white blood and soil arguments. I think we shouldn't say that, you know, anyone has a better or prior claim, right, to other people. You know, this is ultimately a country where we're all living together. We have to have a way of living together, right? Because at the end of the day, we all do live together. So I do want to say, right, like, before I get cancelled, and I actually disavow some of the way that Barclay talked about it. But look, overall, it was a great conversation in the sense that we were able to have a lot of interesting discussion. I think we learned more history in school of every culture, including Indigenous. Yeah. On serious note, Drew, you should interact with chat more, bring them in more. No, that's true. That's true. Look, it was just a little bit more difficult today because obviously I was having a very lively chat with Barclay. So to also try and monitor the whole the chat the whole time was a little bit difficult. But I do agree with you. I do definitely want to bring the chat in quite a lot. We've got 35 people watching live right now, guys. If you're watching live, please consider going and subscribing to my channel and giving the video a like. Help me reach more people. I'd really appreciate it. We've already got a really good number tonight. We've had almost 100 hours in watch. We've had about 100 watch hours in watch time, and yeah, like to have an average of 47 to average 47 viewers over 2 hours is a really cool thing. So I really appreciate it, guys. The good news is that the streams are really growing a lot. When I started, I was averaging out about 15 people a stream, and we're now getting. Today we have 47 people watching, and we're definitely averaging above 30 now. Getting to around 35 sometimes. So it's really good. It's really good. And I appreciate everyone who's been tuning in. I'm starting to really like streaming, and I promise I'm going to keep on doing this every day for the next 100 days. And just we're going to see how big we can get this. I hope that by the end of the 100 days, I can get to 100 live viewers. I think that would be a really good thing. If we could keep 100 live average viewers going by the end of the 100 days, I'd be really happy. Aboriginal perspective is a cross subject that is shoehorned into lessons. This is what diversity say. Okay. Unconditional love. Stay blessed, every baby. Thank you, Kevin. Well said, man. Also, Drew, why are you trafficking Asians for $70? Yeah, dude, what the fuck was that on about? Do you guys remember that? At the very start, someone was going like, oh, Drew promised me that I was going to get a gift for $70. I was like, what the fuck's this guy talking about? It was pretty funny. I actually have no idea. I've got no clue what the fuck that was about. But yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you get really weird people in the chat. But guys, yeah, I'm really happy. That was actually our second best ever average. I see that the viewership's dropping a bit now. Maybe we might call it a day, guys, unless anybody's got some really important last minute comments or anything. But I might call it a day soon. But yeah, thank you so much. That was a very successful stream. Really good fun. I'm really starting to enjoy this all. And Drew, no e-begging today. I mean, look, guys. Oh, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for donating. I really appreciate that, mate. Listen, guys, if you want to donate, I'd really appreciate it. I'm not going to beg about it, but every donation helps a lot. I've been putting in the hours. I think I've done almost 70 hours of live streaming over the past 3 weeks. So I'm hang on. May I sub? Dude, it'd be awesome if you subscribed, Kevin. It'd be awesome if you subscribed. I think I put in the description on the video. I think I put in the description the link to subscribe. When's the stream start? So I started the stream. Barclay was on the stream right from the start. So if you go from the start, you can watch the whole thing. It was a pretty interesting conversation, honestly. Great discussion, even if I don't agree with Barclay. Yeah, look, guys, I think it's actually been really interesting. Like, we've had Greens people on. The funny thing is we've literally had communists on, we've had far left on, we've had Greens on, I've had liberals now, I've had like literally even extreme right. Like, I'm literally talking to anybody, and it's really interesting. When does your evening stream start? So we started at about 8 today. But I agree, like, dudes, I'll definitely try in the future to have like a kind of more set time. Have a Labor person on. Yeah. Actually, okay, guys, very funny comment here. Very funny comment. So at one point we actually had Bill Shorten's daughter watching, which is really funny. And she said that she would get Bill to try join the stream. So if I can get Bill Shorten on the stream, I'd fucking love that. It'd be good fun, right? What's new says, can we get a dab? Nah, mate, not today. Prediction on average viewers by the 100th day. Look, it's hard, man. It's hard. Like, I try to be a bit more conservative. I think, conservatively, I reckon I hope I hit 50 average viewers by the 100th day, but I really, really hope that we can go better than that. And if I can average about 100 viewers by the 100th day, I'd be really, really happy. That would be good. I actually got a message from Ricky Klein. Nice stream, mate. Thank you, Ricky, for joining. That's really good, mate. It's good. We're getting people from all over joining. It's really interesting. Why your evening streams start different times? It's annoying. I apologize, man. It's just kind of like my own schedule. So like, I still work. So today I went to worked for, 9 to 5. And then now I'm streaming for another 2 hours. Eventually, hopefully, if I can build up the channel and I can actually make this sort of my job, I'll definitely try and make it much more, like, I'll try put set times and make it a lot more predictable. At the moment, it's just a little bit difficult because it's, obviously I'm trying to fit this all in with my work schedule as well, guys, and juggling a lot of different things. But yeah, I've got a comment by Max Super. Definitely get Bill Shorten on, dude. If I can get Bill Shorten on, I'd be over the moon. It'd be funny as hell if I got Bill Shorten on. That'd be awesome. You should talk about Labor's new plan to tax unrealized gains in super. That's Blake Schubert. Listen, I do actually think it's pretty silly. I mean, I voted Labor, but I think it's pretty silly. I don't think. So Cosmic Pizza makes the point that 3 million affects only 0.5% of the population. I think the problem is Cosmic Pizza that it's not indexed. So, in about 50 years' time, 3 million is going to be the equivalent, I guess, of a lot less today just because of the natural rate of inflation. Therefore, it will affect a lot more people. Also, I think part of the problem here is to tax unrealized gains is very difficult, guys. If you're taxing unrealized gains, like you're forcing people to sell their shares and stuff like that, it becomes a lot more difficult to try and actually do that logistically. Super should not be for retirement savings. Super should be for retirement savings, not a wealth hoarding monster. I mean, I do agree with Cosmic Pizza to that. I do agree there, but yeah. I got a comment. You at the fruit shop still? No, guys. Sadly, my dad sold the fruit shop many years ago. I work for Tony Morris, the barrister who helped me against UQ. So I work as a legal assistant, and it's good fun. I like it. But look, one day I really like to be able to make my sort of media career my main job. That's what I really like to do because I love this stuff. It's good fun, guys. I really want to do that long term. Super is Australia's greatest infrastructure investment body. Superannuation should be optional. Hasn't reduced percentage of people on in retirement. It's tough, guys. It's tough, isn't it? Any other? Who else? Who else? What's News puts the sad face. I'm sorry, What's News, for not doing the dab. Guys, I'll do a dab for $10, but I can't be doing that stuff for free, my friends. You know what? I'm gonna give this like maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, guys, because I'm at 99 watch hours and I want to hit 100 watch hours. So guys, don't leave yet. Stay on board for like at least 5 more minutes. We'll hit 100 hours in watch hours and then we'll stop. I really hope so, guys. Cosmic Pizza. Who the hell has over 3 million in super for wages? Boo-hoo, you can't afford your 200th mention. Cry me a fucking river, mate. That's funny, man. Look, but Cosmic Pizza, do you accept though? Like, if you don't index it, 3 million in like 50 years time, that's going to be the equivalent of like, I don't know, 500,000. That will obviously impact a lot more people. So you got to index it. You got to try and keep it in line with inflation at the very least, right? We're at 99.2 watch hours, guys. Okay, what's that? Okay, we do a dab. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. It's cool, guys. Thank you for the super chats. We do a dab. Thank you, guys. What's News? Thanks for the dab money. I appreciate it, my friend. And look, What's News? We'll do another debate sometime. Again, we disagree on a lot of stuff, but it's interesting to have these conversations. I actually saw What's News that you got cancelled by people even more to the right of you. I don't even know what that was over. But apparently, I think What's News got cancelled by the guys who are even more far right than him. So, I guess even the right wing have their own ideological purity brigade. Where do you draw the boundary of who you wouldn't debate? Honestly, the boundary of who I won't debate, I will literally debate anybody who hasn't done death threats to me and hasn't threatened to fucking kill my family, right? So I wouldn't debate Bad Empanada because Bad Empanada did death threats to me, right? Bad Empanada, the communist. But I'll debate other communists if they haven't done death threats to me. I'll debate almost anybody as long as they haven't literally personally called for my fucking beheading. I think that's a pretty fair margin. What do you guys reckon? Because I like to debate people. Honestly, the line in the sand for me is just simply, people who are extremists who have actually threatened to kill me, my family. That's where I draw the line. We got, hang on, 15, 25, 30, 40. We got $42 in super chats today, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's really cool. It definitely helps encourage me to keep going. I appreciate that, guys. Thank you. And I think we've just crossed over 100 watch hours, which is awesome. Fuck yeah, we just crossed over 100 watch hours. So thank you, everybody who's been on this stream. I think this is actually my second best ever stream, and it's definitely growing. I really appreciate all your help, guys. And we'll just literally keep this going every day. And hopefully by 100 days, we're you only keep 70% of super chats, right? I think it's something like that. I think YouTube takes a pretty big chunk, but it is the game. It is the game, unfortunately. Should sue Bad Empanada, bring him into Australia so he can be poor because he spent Australian money. Good point. I'd love to sue Bad Empanada. I hope we can. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. This is a funny comment. Drew is my favorite kind of import. Listen, mate, thank you for that. Barclay says good work, mate. Thank you, Barclay. It was a good chat today. It was a good chat. And yeah, guys, if you've been watching, please subscribe to the channel. I think we've almost hit 8,400 subscribers. Streamlabs, text the chat. You keep all the donations. Yeah, guys, I will start doing Streamlabs. I've been doing StreamYard until now, but I'm going to move over to Streamlabs because, you know, Destiny uses Streamlabs. All these other big streamers use Streamlabs. I've got to move over in the end. But I might call it an end now, guys. Thank you so much. Good night. Thank you, MW. I'll do a shout out to everyone. Thank you, MW. Thank you to Yusuf. Thank you to Mitchell for watching. Thank you to Mr. F. The streams are good. There's a mix of left and right wing people. Thank you, man. Thank you, Mr. F. I appreciate your comments as well. I appreciate the super chat from What's News, even though that's going to get me cancelled. I bet Alt Media Watch will clip that up and say Drew's getting money from Nazis. Dodo, thank you for watching. A person too, Kevin Lyman, Kerpow. Just going to shout out everyone. Shout out to Landiu. Shout out to Dodo. Shout out to Cosmic Pizza. Shout out to MW. Shout out to Kevin Lyman. I think I've gone through. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching. Left wing here. Yeah. Anyway, good night, guys. Thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, guys. God bless you all.